Chapter 904. Analysis. The artisan is suspected to be under the control of a cult or secret organization. Yet, he's trying to get the hermit's help? Just get the world. Who knows which waters the future is in at the moment, and how long it would take to reach there. What's more, the world can teleport. After hearing the hanged man's prayers, Klein subconsciously rebutted his request, believing that it would delay an opportunity, causing unnecessary losses. He then calmed down, believing that with Mr. Hanged Man's attention to detail and experience, it was impossible for him to commit such a simple error, since he believed that he definitely had his reasons for requesting the hermit's help instead of the world. This also means that Mr. Hanged Man has determined that the matter hasn't reached a critical state that requires immediate action. He even wishes to observe further to find more clues and details. Besides, since Ma'am Hermit had offered to provide help in advance, it means that she believes that, for the time being, her region of activity would overlap with Mr. Hanged Man's. If anything really happens, she would be able to rush there at the fastest speed possible. Or does she too have powers similar to teleport? But that's a very low possibility. Klein tapped the edges of the modeled table, believing that he should trust Mr. Hanged Man's experience. Of course, this also included the fact that Mr. Hanged Man hadn't described in detail about his discoveries or areas of suspicion, preventing him from inferring or divining the truth of the matter. As his thoughts stirred, Klein threw the Hanged Man's prayer scene into the crimson star representing the hermit. As he was waiting for Admiral of Stars to reply, he suddenly saw the star representing the sun suddenly contract and expand as it produced stacked layers of prayers. The City of Silver's exploration of the former chief's mausoleum has some preliminary results? Klein made a guess as he emanated his spirituality over. In accordance with his expectations, Little Sun began recounting everything that had happened after the 3 members of the 6-member council opened the former chief's mausoleum. This included encountering the souls of their deceased relatives, the river they crossed which hid countless strange creatures, and how they faced the incomplete mythical creature form of the former chief whose body was covered in white feathers. It also included Shepherd Lovia's separation of a shadow in an attempt to pounce onto the illusory tubes that extended out of the former chief's body. However, she was stopped when Colin Iliad used the Fate Siphon charm, swapping his and the former chief's fate for a brief moment, causing a difference in outcomes. Thin illusory black tubes. White feathers stained with pale yellow oil. This sounds familiar. Yes, wasn't this the main characteristic in the scene I saw when I divined the abnormality with Azek's copper whistle? And the reason that former chief built the mausoleum was to switch to sequence 3 ferrymen of the death pathway. As Klein listened, his mind raced, joining the dots together and considering what kind of conclusion he could receive from that. Soon he had a bold guess. The mutation of the City of Silver's former chief had a certain connection with the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project. Although this conclusion sounded inexplicable and unbelievable since the City of Silver was situated in the completed isolated forsaken land of the gods, it was a place that could only be entered through certain means via the Giant King's court and ruins of the Battle of the Gods. Even the 7 deities couldn't find it or have the power to infiltrate it. However, the numerous similarities made Klein, who was sensitive to coincidences, combine the actions of Shepherd Elder Lovia in the operation, and eliminate the other possibilities, so as to seriously consider what the 2 seemingly unconnected matters might possibly point towards. From the scene that he received from divination, and the experiences of having white feather grow from the pores of the back of his hands when he summoned the failed product of artificial death, as well as the encounter of the 3 City of Silver Elders, he began suspecting that the Numinous Episcopate's attempt might have achieved success to a certain degree. Through a series of sacrificial rituals and the transformation of their own high-sequence Beyonders, they influenced death's remains via backward propagation, causing that abstract, illusory uniqueness which represented a deity's authority to generate some form of sentience. This allowed the object that was only a totem and a concept to come to life. Hence, this unintelligent object that couldn't be considered artificial death had begun assimilating the entire ritual, eagerly exerting its influence on lower sequence Beyonders of the same pathway. After reaching certain conditions, the object hidden in the depths of the black fog could extend thin illusory black tubes, establishing connections with the target, and draw upon their strength to transform their bodies. And this method might involve the underworld, or something special about Death's domain. It could circumvent the force that isolated the forsaken land of the gods, and make effective contact with the beings within. Therefore, the shadow that Shepherd Elder Lovia had produced was a bestowment of the true creator. Its goal was to follow the thin illusory black tubes on the former chief's body, and trace the remains of the corrupted Death? Perhaps this was how the Mother Tree of Desire replaced the chained god back then and seized the corresponding authority. Thankfully, the current chief of the City of Silver has a very clear mind. He knew ahead of time to seek out the secret existence backing Little Sun for help. By using the Fate Siphon charm, he remarkably foiled the true creator's ploy. From the looks of it, the two powerful sealed artifacts of the City of Silver are good at purification. They're able to stop the shadow that can corrupt Death's remains. Haha, as the fool, I seem to have crossed the true creator once again. Of course, Amon will be the one taking the blame since the Worm of Time was contributed by him. Through Little Sun's description and relying on his own interference, Klein roughly figured out the hidden conflict that happened during the City of Silver's exploratory operation. Meanwhile, he also gained a first look at Shepherd Elder's mental condition. To Lovia, thin illusory black tubes that lead to the outside world was undoubtedly the key to the City of Silver's escape from the forsaken land of the gods. Therefore, she was very certain of her actions this time, without showing any signs of regret. She would only believe that the chief was the one who shattered that hope. It's not too terrifying to have someone do evil deeds. What's most terrifying is when people who have a martyrish mentality do evil they believe to be right. Klein couldn't help but sigh inwardly. As for why Little Sun knew what happened inside the mausoleum so clearly, it was obvious that Chief Colin Iliad had informed him during a casual chat. At this point, Derek had already recounted how the three elders had retrieved a special sealed artifact. It was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by the former chief that had fused with his bones. The former chief was from the Giant Pathway, beginning from Sequence 9 Warrior to Sequence 4 Demon Hunter. The Ferryman potion he consumed corresponds to the Death Pathway's Sequence 3. The two Beyonder characteristics mixed together must be weirder and more varied than a single pathway. Together with the added effects of artificial death, the final sealed artifact must be very powerful. Of course, the negative effects will probably be equally powerful. Yes, back when the Black Illusory River was described, the various weird creatures likely corresponded to the underworld. This is similar to the scene I saw in the Berserk Sea. It's also similar in effect to what Miss Sharon's mystical item created. As Klein thought about it, he listened to Little Sun wrap up the topic of the exploration before mentioning the monster known as Shapeshifter. After Derek finished describing it, Klein felt that shapeshifters were very likely Bizarro Banes. He hurriedly summoned a gold coin from the junk pile, and did a divination to confirm his guess. With Little Sun's current strength, there's no way for him to head to that city to hunt it. I can only wait until that chief prays to the fool once again, or seeks help via Little Sun. Anyway, there's no rush. I haven't found the spirit world plunderer yet. Klein nodded indiscernibly. After requesting Mr. Fool to pass the corresponding information to Mr. World, Derek said that he had enough points and could soon exchange for the Beyonder characteristic for Sequence 5 Vampire, and complete the three-party transaction. So he requested that Mr. Moon prepare himself. On the Future, which was slowly cruising across the waters of the Rorstad archipelago, Admiral of Stars Katlia thanked Mr. Fool, and nudged the glasses on her nose. Opening the window to the captain's cabin, she shouted to everyone, "Turn towards Byam." After issuing the command, this pirate admiral curled the corners of her mouth. She finally had the chance to establish a long-term cooperation with an artisan. But at that moment, she suddenly thought of a problem. If she easily received the help of an artisan, would Frank Lee, who hadn't been able to obtain a Sequence 5 potion formula, attempt to make the Druid Beyonder characteristic into an item to expedite his paused experiments? That's not a good thing. Katlia subconsciously raised her hand and pinched her forehead. On the liner, Klein, who had finished handling the matters, focused on enjoying his trip. Due to the Berserk Sea's abnormal change in weather, the liner he was on board had chosen to take a further and more roundabout sea route that was much safer. Furthermore, it was to dock at a harbor named Halman for the night. Klein didn't alight and remained at a windowside table at the upper levels restaurant to have his dinner. While waiting for his food, he casually looked out the window and took in the local night skyline. Suddenly, he discovered a suspicious figure with a luggage bag preparing to board the ship. The reason why he appeared suspicious wasn't only because the man was wearing a black overcoat and tall top hat, but that he wore a scarf that wrapped his face, hiding his physical features. All that was left were a pair of eyes. And that pair of eyes were peeled to the ground, preventing anyone from discerning his actual appearance. Chapter 905. Psychological blind spot. Based on his experience from watching many detective animations, Klein believed that someone who wore a scarf to conceal his face and hid his physical characteristics with an overcoat was likely problematic. He probably hid an unspeakable secret, especially when it wasn't winter yet, and the temperature in the Berserk Sea couldn't be considered cold. However, this has nothing to do with me. Even if a locked room murder mystery happens, the one having a headache would be the captain. I should head above the gray fog later to do a divination and see if this trip will be smooth. Klein didn't mind the matter, but he still thought about it conscientiously. He retracted his gaze and looked at the desi roasted fish that was being served by the waiter. After having dinner, he returned to his cabin and completed a divination above the gray fog. He obtained the conclusion that there wouldn't be drastic changes to the environment he was in, and that everything would happen smoothly. This allowed Klein to fall asleep peacefully without relying on cogitation as he slept till daybreak. With a whistle from the steam engine, the liner began moving and departing Halman Harbor. The harbor could still be vaguely seen as Klein saw a figure there. The figure wore a white shirt and a dark blue coat. He had a rather high nose, deeply recessed eyes, light blue eyes and brown curly hair. His face was rather cut and his chin was slightly raised. He gave off a supercilious look. With a sweep of his gaze, he quickly locked onto the liner which Klein was on. At this moment, the sky suddenly darkened as though a door leading into the pitch-black land of illusions had formed. A deafening typhoon stirred up from the seabed, surging upwards with massive amounts of blue mass. Dark lightning flashed like rifts in the void. They kept appearing and kept healing themselves until they disappeared. This completely blocked the vision of those on the liner and at the harbor, putting them in two seemingly different worlds. The Berserk Sea had once again shown its horror. The liner failed to avoid or resist, and it could only continue cruising forward along the safe sea route that had relatively weaker storms. What a coincidence! This likely isn't a coincidence. Standing behind the window of his cabin, Klein first sighed inwardly before coming to the conclusion that this sudden anomaly in the Berserk Sea was due to unnatural reasons. Although it was common for the weather in the Berserk Sea to change suddenly without notice, to actually change at a particular point in time still left one suspicious. The man at the dock is tracking the suspicious tourist from last night, and that tourist decided to change the weather upon realizing that he had been exposed, doing so that he can force the liner to leave? Klein made a guess when he made the connection. And if that really were the case, it means that the suspicious passenger who hid his face with a scarf might very well be a demigod or someone who carried a Grade 1 sealed artifact. After all, with Klein's present strength and items, it was impossible for him to trigger such a weather anomaly without the use of Sea God Scepter. Of course, he also had other means like throwing out Azek's copper whistle to see if he could cause the entire Berserk Sea to go berserk. Seriously? I just want to be a normal tycoon that's heading to the southern continent. Why would I encounter a pursuit at the level of demigods? Sigh, I'm under too much stress that my sequence doesn't deserve. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh, and finally chose to believe the divination he made last night. Amidst the storm, the wobbling liner cruised along a rather calm stretch with apocalyptic scenes around it. And most of the tourists wore calm looks as though they were very accustomed to such conditions. Only a few people who were on their first trip across the Berserk Sea were trembling, grabbing tightly to anything they could grab at. Time ticked by as the gales and lightning gradually calmed down. Bit by bit, the sky brightened. At this moment Klein, who was on the deck, felt his spiritual perception trigger. He subconsciously looked in the direction of Halman Harbor. Above the undulating dark blue waves, beneath white scattered clouds, There was a white radiant flame flying over at high speeds from afar. The flame increased in size and became increasingly clearer, until it revealed its complete form. It was a gigantic flaming spear. The flaming spear tore across the sky and landed at the bow of the liner's deck. However, it didn't ignite anything. It burnt through half a wooden plank and spread out before materializing into a figure. The figure had a high nose, deeply recessed eyes and blue eyes. He was none other than the man who had previously appeared at the dock. He looked middle-aged as he slowly surveyed the area, and walked through the wide-eyed and agape tourists before walking into the cabin. The similarly agape Dwayne Dantes silently heaved a sigh of relief when he confirmed that the person wasn't here for him. The way he appeared sure is cool. As expected of a demigod. Now the only issue is that they do not come to blows. Even if the conflict cannot be helped, it's best they go to a neighboring sea to fight. Otherwise, there's no way this ship can withstand it. I can teleport away quite successfully, but all these tourists, I'll only be able to save a few. Klein habitually drew the sign of the crimson moon on his chest, praying for the goddess to bless them. Just as he had such a thought, he saw a figure fly out of the cabin, slamming heavily onto the deck. It was none other than the suspicious tourist who had covered his face with a scarf. This man had already revealed half his face. The tip of his nose was red and he had a thick beard around his mouth with saliva staining them. His nearly triangular eyes were filled with horror. He held his hands to the deck as he kept crawling backward. Who got you to carry that item and put on such a disguise? At the cabin's entrance, the middle-aged man with the high nose and blue eyes slowly walked out. He spoke in Intis with a heavy voice. The suspicious tourist shook his head frantically. No, I don't know. He was also wearing the same. He gave me £100 to take this ship to the southern continent before returning by myself. The middle-aged man silently watched with his penetrating glare that seemed to tear through his soul. This made the tourist break out into a sweat as his body convulsed. He once again stammered his explanation, but there weren't any changes to it. The man retracted his gaze before his body burst into white radiant flames. Following that, he transformed into a gigantic flaming spear and shot towards the region where Halman Harbor was. The flaming spear quickly disappeared into the distance, leaving a twinkling speck. During this entire process, apart from at the very beginning, the demigod didn't take a second look at the surroundings tourists. It was as though they never existed. A simple but smart ruse. By getting someone to disguise as himself and board the ship, then using certain means to control the weather. Thus, creating proof that he's on the ship, but in actual fact, he had been at the harbor the entire time. Once the enemy starts the pursuit, he can then attempt to escape. Enlightened, Klein made a judgment. This made him suspect if the pursuee was once a conspirer, magician, or other beyonder that was good at coming up with ruses. As for the person who transformed into a burning white spear, his arrogance, detestable nature, and his usage of the Intis language had made Klein believe that he was probably a demigod from the hunter pathway. It was possible that he was an iron-blooded knight. I've no idea why there was a conflict. Klein shook his head and returned to his cabin. On the deck, the tourists finally snapped to their senses as they discussed the supernatural phenomenon they had just seen in murmurs. A person could transform into a flame, and the flame could reform into a human. Amidst the noisy commotion, the liner continued cruising forward on the safe sea route. It didn't encounter any accidents midway, and it arrived at another harbor at midnight. Like usual, Klein didn't alight, afraid that he would encounter something. He took out his gold pocket watch and opened it to determine the time to head to the restaurant. Another half an hour. Klein silently muttered to himself as he looked up and out the window. At this moment, many tourists who were bound for this harbor were heading for the dock along the gangway with their luggage in hand. As he swept his gaze, Klein's gaze suddenly stopped on a figure. The figure wore a black bonnet. He had dark golden sideburns. His lips were tightly pursed and his facial features were clear and distinct, like an ancient, classical sculpture without any wrinkles. He wasn't carrying any luggage, and soon, he stepped onto the dock with the crowd, disappearing into the corner of the road. Klein just watched motionlessly, as though his body wasn't his. He felt every drop of his blood turn cold as a name appeared in his mind. Ensanguil. The street lamps on the harbor had already lit up. The liner's many windows also lit up in concert with them. Dwayne Dantes was waiting inside a first-class cabin in darkness and silence. Klein had already sat down without showing any emotion. All kinds of thoughts couldn't help but flash across his mind. This is the first time I'm discovering signs of ensanguil after the great smog of Backlund. The demigod from before was probably tracking ensanguil. His tricks are more profound than I thought. He found someone to disguise as him, and gave him items not to divert his trackers, but to create a mental blind spot. It made one subconsciously eliminate this ship from the possible options. He was here from the beginning. That coincidental change in weather was likely created by ensanguil with 0-08. Why would he be pursued by an Intis hunter demigod? What is he plotting? Amidst his churning thoughts, Klein suddenly took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew it. Silently, Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker with her 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand appeared before him. Klein opened his mouth before closing them again. Picking up a pen, he quickly wrote, Mr. Dwayne Dantes has discovered traces of ensanguil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea. Folding the letter, Klein handed it along with a gold coin to Miss Messenger. Send it to the mailbox at Backlund's 7, Pinsta Street. The 4 heads in Rionette Tinker's hand turned at the same time as the 8 eyes looked at Klein. She didn't say anything and bit onto the letter and gold coin. Chapter 906. Leonard's Warning. Backlund, Northborough. The pitch-black night had the crimson moon covered by clouds. There were only street lamps on the 2 sides of the road that emitted a faint light, illuminating the road ahead and the doors of the nearby houses. 7 Pinsta Street's mailbox was silently hiding in the intersection between light and dark, bathing in a cool breeze that blew from the side as though it was in a slumber. At this moment, newspapers, bills, and letters from various unknown people suddenly spewed out from its mouth. These objects seemed to be dragged by an invisible hand as they floated in midair before flying towards the door and entering through a gap. Inside the house, at the foyer, the newspapers automatically spread open as they rapidly flipped over. Then, they were casually left on the chair, stacking over other newspapers. The bills and letters continued flying into the living room, with the former quickly stopping. With a few shakes, they floated to the surface of the coffee table and lined up. The latter had their envelopes removed, and the letters without envelopes quickly unfolded themselves, showcasing themselves in midair. After a while, a portion of these letters flew onto a rack on the first-floor study. Some rushed for the scissors to help it cut itself apart. Then they orderly surged into the washroom and were thrown into the toilet. Whoosh! The mechanical flush of the toilet was automatically depressed, washing away the paper shreds into the sewers. 7 Pinsta Street went back to normal, and its silence was identical to an uninhabited house's. Southern Continent. East Balham. Colane City. Leonard Mitchell, who had just arrived, was resting in a residence arranged by the local Church of Evernight. Suddenly, that slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. Punk, you have an important letter. What letter? While Leonard asked softly, he already had a guess in mind. To mail an important letter to 7 Pinsta Street without caring that it was inhabited, there was only one no, 2 people, Klein Moretti and Dwayne Dantes. As for why the old man named Palaz Zoros could still clearly read the letters sent to 7th Pinsta Street despite the Berserk Sea and half the northern continent separating them, Leonard had only a guess or two. This was because he had helped the old man capture a specter before. With regards to this, his theory was, old man definitely used a worm of time to parasitize that specter, making it his eyes, ears, and mouth in the northern continent. At that moment, Palaz Zoros replied to his question. It's from Klein Moretti. He said that while Dwayne Dantes was heading to the southern continent, he discovered traces of ensanguil on Waypoint Island in the Berserk Sea. Leonard fell silent immediately as his mouth turned agape. However, he didn't say a word. After a long while, he muttered with a slightly hoarse voice. As expected, he didn't forget the need for revenge. What can I do? What can you do? You're only a sequence 6. Even if ensanguil doesn't wield 0-08, you still lack the qualifications to exact vengeance on him. He just needs to reveal his mythical creature form to make you lose control, and become a lunatic. The chances of you getting your revenge are 0. This is the qualitative change that godhood brings, Pallas Zoros said rather sternly. He paused before chuckling. Thankfully, you understand yourself in a way that's better than before. In the past, you definitely would have said that you would inform the church with news of Ensanguil and join the team to pursue him. And now, you know to ask what you can do. Leonard had wanted to retort a few times, but he ultimately didn't say a word. Pallas Zoros continued. What you can do for now is to give Klein Moretti some information. Wait for him to write back to you. Then, based on the arrangements written, provide the necessary assistance. So no finding excuses, so as to inform the Church of Ensanguil's location? Leonard heavily asked, somewhat surprised. Pallas Zoros chuckled and said, no hurry. Do it at the critical moment. Although 0-08 enjoys causing its possessor's death, it doesn't wish to be sealed even more so. As long as you inform the Church of Ensanguil's location and begin a pursuit, it will immediately learn of it and make the necessary arrangements. Regarding this, you need to warn Klein Moretti. Leonard was taken aback for a second as he asked, Old man, you seem to know 0-08 rather well. It wasn't apparent in the past. Pallas' slightly aged voice chuckled. Of course I am. During the 4th epoch, 0-08 had once caused the death of an angel. I can't tell you too much because once you know of it, it will also know you. The more you know about it, the more likely you will become a character in its stories. Leonard came to an actual realization of 0-08's terror from Old Man's vague words. This had already exceeded the mysticism he knew. After some thought, Leonard asked habitually, Then how should I hint to Klein Moretti without letting 0-08 know? Or that even if he were to know, it will be very superficial knowledge, making me a bystander in the story. Just as he said that, Leonard clasped his hands and gritted his teeth. Without waiting for Old Man's reply, he continued, An indirect hint? I'll tell him I'll temporarily not inform the Church of Ensanguil's location. I believe he should be able to understand that there's a problem based on the situation. He will understand that we need to be extremely cautious. And even if he fails to interpret that, his secret organization has members who understand the 4th epoch well enough to provide him with help. Also, just writing the sentence, once you know it, it will also know you, without mentioning 0-08 should be enough for Klein to guess what this is pointing at. After Pallas Zoros finished listening, he chuckled and said, Humans will only grow under pressure. Leonard exhaled and sat up. He found a pen and paper and penned his thoughts. Following that, he set up a ritual right on the heels of that, and summoned Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. Berserk Sea Waypoint Island. On a liner docked at the harbor. Many tourists weren't alighting. They were huddled in the lower deck cabins, waiting to arrive at the southern continent to begin a life filled with hope. They had gone through a great deal of effort to save up the fare for a ship ride that spanned a few short days. They were from Lone, and were those who had been forced to take such risks. Klein, who was acting as the tycoon, Dwayne Dantes, wasn't like them. He lived in a spacious, clean first-class cabin that could even be described as luxurious. Under some candlelight, he opened the letter that had just been delivered by Rionette Tinker. Will not be informing the Church of Ensanguil's location for the time being. To Leonard, although the source of the tip might put him in certain danger, it's not impossible for him to do it. Didn't he join the Red Gloves to seek revenge? This means that he has a reason why he can't sound the alarm on Ensanguil. As Klein thought, he continued reading the rest of the letter. Once you know it, it will also know you. Suddenly, Klein exclaimed, finding the description somewhat familiar. This is very similar to the Twilight Hermit Order. Any mention of it will be known. So 0-08 is a sealed artifact of the Spectator Pathway? Leonard isn't informing the Church of this matter, because he's held back by this. He wishes to wait for a better opportunity? This is likely something the grandpa in his body told him. Klein nodded in thought, feeling thankful that he hadn't asked Rionette Tinker for help moments ago. That would have been equally dangerous for Miss Messenger. Besides, most important of all, I haven't made any preparations. If I were to only rely on a helper I hire, my plan might very well be detected by 0-08 ahead of time. A series of coincidences would then be created, producing a targeted arrangement. Klein silently sighed and felt that he needed to do something, but he was at a loss as to how to begin. From the angle of improving his strength, the acquirement of the corresponding ingredients of Bizarro Bane and Spirit World Plunderer depended on the subsequent request of the City of Silver's chief, and how long Miss Magician could receive the exact coordinates from her teacher. These were all dependent on external factors that Klein had no means of expediting. The only thing he could do was to try his best to digest the marionettist potion as quickly as possible. And after concluding most of the acting principles, the actual implementation was more important. Therefore, Klein believed that he needed to obtain 2 marionettes within a short span of time. He had previously been delaying it because he didn't have any good targets. It stemmed from him being in Backland with servants around him. Unless they were special marionettes, it was very difficult to hide their existences. And now he was almost at the southern continent. He decided that as long as he identified an evil target who deserved the gallows, he would first transform them into his marionette until he had a better replacement. Perhaps using an ordinary marionette to complete a rather difficult task will accelerate the digestion. My standards for a marionette has dropped to its lowest. All it needs to know is Detonese. That way, I don't have to hire an interpreter. After all, I can share their senses. Klein quickly made up his mind and planned on writing to Leonard Mitchell after he had a more advanced plan. East Balam, Colane City. Klein carried his luggage and stepped onto the dock, touching ground on the southern continent. He looked into the distance at the city that was built on terraces. He silently said to himself, I have to have 2 marionettes when I leave this place. And before that, he had one thing to do. It was to lose the tail of the followers that the military had arranged. The 2 gentlemen were rather good at being spies, but to Klein, they were as bright as fireflies in the night. This was because no matter how well disguised they were, Klein could use his faceless ability of observation and his memory of a human's physical features and looks to recognize them at a glance. Chapter 907. The power of mysticism. Most of Colane City's buildings were built on paths that spiraled upwards. There would be squares or small towns in the middle, or on rather flat, open spaces. Klein carried his luggage, and with his spiritual intuition as a seer, he randomly chose a direction to proceed in, and found a relatively lively bar along the way. There weren't many carriages on the streets, and the rental types were a rare sight. The most popular means of transportation in East Balam was a coffin. This stemmed from their traditions of worshipping death. People viewed coffins as items that brought about serenity and peace. Therefore, Klein often saw people walking past him carrying a black coffin. The lids were lighter than the usual kind, and were just like a carriage door that could be opened at any time. They're carried via 2, 4, or either people, or by horses or single-horned goats. Such a tradition is quite terrifying at night. It's not much better in the day. The entire city feels dark and creepy. Klein took in the scenery around him as he walked into the square. On the left was a cathedral of the Lord of Storms, and on the right were restaurants and bars. When he stopped in his tracks, a coffin being carried by 4 men was also lowered. As the lid was opened, the passenger inside the coffin stood up and took a step forward. He was a northern continent-styled gentleman dressed in a white shirt and black vest. The gentleman's formal coat was slung against his arm, something he wore only after he left the coffin. Then, Klein saw the man head straight for the Lord of Storms Cathedral and enter it. This sure is quite discordant. Doesn't the Church of Storms enjoy changing the traditions of the colonies and forcefully implementing those of Lone? Why don't they do that in East Balam? Is it because the Death Pathway and Evernight Pathway are similar, so the Church of Storms wishes to preserve some of the traditions of death worship, so as to curb the proliferation of the Church of Evernight? Klein nodded in thought as he turned to the buildings on the right, prepared to enter one of the bars there. Having experienced it personally, he came to the realization as to why the dressing style of the ancient Balam Empire was written as such in so many history books. They enjoy wearing trousers, those that are light and breezy. They find creases beautiful. Isn't this to make it easier to lie in a coffin when outside? Klein shook his head with a smile as he pushed open the heavy wooden door. Squeezing through the drunkards, he walked towards the bar counter. And at this moment, The two military followers had deliberately opened up a distance from Dwayne Dantes to prevent themselves from being exposed. They had walked to the door side. Taking this brief reprieve, Klein suddenly switched directions and passed through the crowd like a fish in water, heading straight for the bar's back door. Although he didn't know Dantes, he could read drawings on signs and knew where the washrooms and places where entry was forbidden to customers. After circling to a blind spot from the door, Klein quickly took off his coat and slung it on his arm. Immediately, with his golden cane, he reached out his palm to cover his face and slow down his pace. Turning directions again, he headed for the bar's entrance. After opening up a distance of nearly 10 meters from where he took off his coat, Klein lowered his face-shielding right hand to reveal a completely different face. His white sideburns, deep eyes, and elegant demeanor was all gone. He had switched to a common Loanese face that could be seen anywhere on the northern continent. With luggage and cane in hand, Klein walked staidly towards the two military followers. As they were looking for Dwayne Dantes, he walked past them and left the bar. Be it tracking or anti-tracking, they were both strong traits of a faceless. Returning to the square, Klein turned into a sloped alley that led to higher ground. He planned on finding a hotel elsewhere. As he walked on a rather deserted path, he suddenly heard a woman's frantic cries. The voice was only maintained for a very short moment before it was silenced. Although he didn't know what she was shouting, Klein could sense the horror, fear, and panic in her voice. Hence, he switched directions and entered a narrower and more deserted trail. In less than 10 seconds, he saw a local man in his 30s who was pressing against a 13 or 14-year-old girl in a secluded corner and was using violence against her. His skin was brownish, and he had rather soft facial features. Klein took a glance and slowed down his pace before stopping in the nearby shadows. At this moment, the girl's face was extremely horrified and distorted. However, regardless of how she struggled, she was unable to free herself and had only received a beating in response. Her tears and snot flowed out while her mouth was stuffed with cloth. All she could do was produce muffling sounds. At this moment, she was surprised that the rotten egg's attempts to take off her clothes had slowed down. Without having the time to consider what was happening, she subconsciously looked at the rotten egg and found that his eyes had widened. His facial muscles were writhing slowly, but he was unable to form a complete expression on his face. Then his limbs twitched and paused as they continued doing what they were doing, but were easily avoided. The girl instinctively pushed him, which had ended up having surprisingly excellent results. Freed, she immediately stood up and fled. However, she couldn't help but feel her legs go limp. After a few steps, she tripped over a stone and nearly fell to the ground. At this moment, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. Reeling in anxiety, she fumbled to her feet. But almost immediately, the sounds of footsteps suddenly ceased. The girl subconsciously looked back only to see the rotten egg standing 2 meters away. His joints were making strange actions as though they were rusted. What's happening? The girl felt as though she was having a nightmare. The brown-skinned man struggled for a moment before quietening down. Revealing a smile, he said in Dantes, "In the future, when you meet someone like me, remember to head for the nearest cathedral, or somewhere where there's plenty of people." The girl was taken aback for a moment before she screamed. Turning around, she ran as fast as she could. Subconsciously, she chose to run in the direction of the square where the cathedral was. When the calm and silence of the deserted spot was restored, the brown-skinned man turned to look at the nearby shadows where Klein walked out from. A new marionette. His body isn't strong enough, and he's not nimble enough. He lacks beyonder powers and looks rather fierce. Apart from knowing Dantes, he's completely useless, Klein simply evaluated. If it wasn't because he was committing a crime and that I wasn't proficient in the local language, I would have buried him immediately. He couldn't help but make a comparison with his former marionette, Admiral of Blood Seigneur. Seigneur was a wraith, and was capable of mirror blink. He could hide in gold coins and reflective surfaces. I didn't need to worry that he would be seen by others. He also had shriek and the ability to possess others. Together with a marionettist, it's a perfect combination. More importantly, he also knew Dantes. Comparing this marionette and him is like the difference between a penny and 42,000 gold pounds. I've no idea what his name is, and I can only use powers to sense some superficial thoughts. I have no way of obtaining deeper memories unless I encounter someone or something familiar. There would be a corresponding change in the spirit to release more information. I'll just call him Ah Fu. Ah no, that's too Chinese. Oof it is. Klein rubbed his temples and sighed. He needed to leave the area with his new marionette, Oof, before the girl led the clergyman over. Before long, with the help of his marionette's translations, he found an inn to stay in at the border between Kolain City's flourishing and backward area. This place didn't need him to provide any proof of identity, even though Klein had already changed his appearance to that of a regular local. There's an even greater lack of administration management than the colonies at sea. Klein put down his luggage and threw most of the cash he brought with him above the gray fog, leaving only £50 for his daily expenses. Meanwhile, having crossed the Berserk Sea, and without needing to be afraid of causing any further anomalies, he took down the copper whistle and iron cigar case from the mysterious space above the gray fog, so as to make it easier for Mr. Azek to locate him. After finishing all of this and having had dinner on the liner, he had the spare time to seek out his second marionette. As for how he could find one, Klein, who didn't understand Kolain City well enough, decided on using his traits as a seer, and do so with mysticism means. With oath he left the inn. Klein snapped a branch of a Donningsman tree, and used it as a dowsing rod. With great familiarity, he used cogitation and muttered, "Location of my new marionette." In the silent environment, pairs of cold eyes seemed to pierce through the obstruction of the incorporeal and the corporeal, and landed on the dowsing rod. The branch fell to the ground and pointed in a direction. After advancing forward a little, he did another divination and followed his new revelation. 7 to 8 turns later he arrived at a steep staircase. This staircase was connected to many roads in Kolain. One had to look up to see the top, and there was no one at all. The divination's revelation is pointing here. Why isn't there anyone here? The result isn't accurate because I didn't do a divination above the gray fog, but I'm already a sequence 5 marionettist. My divination abilities are definitely one of the best below that of high sequence beyonders. Klein frowned slightly as he surveyed the area, but he failed to find any targets. After some thought, he walked towards the staircase and sat in the shadows of the lowest step. He then waited in boredom despite a lack of confidence. After a few minutes, he stood up again and made Oaf sit where he was sitting. Then Klein opened up a gap from him and hid 200 meters away in a hidden spot. Kolain City. Lower Lip District. Leonard Mitchell and Daly Simone arrived at a nearby district with the Red Gloves team captain, Soest. With the night as cover, Soest emphasized the operation to all the members once again. Our target this time is Ulika, who's living at Unit 13. He's a rather important member of the Numinous Episcopate, and is in charge of communicating with the different small teams in Backlund. Although all our intelligence points to him not being a demigod, I have applied for a Grade 1 sealed artifact to be safe. Her Excellency, Goddess's Eye, is also ready to provide her assistance to us at any time. Also, most of the residents of this district are locals. We have to be wary of them also being members of the Numinous Episcopate. Chapter 908. Not leaving any problems. Lower Lip District. 13 K9 Street. The plump Ulika was sitting on a sofa with his tiny dark brown eyes and skin. Wrapping a dried yellow tobacco leaf and 10 different kinds of southern continent herbs and spices together, he cut it into long strips. Then he held his self-made East Balam smoke pipe in his hand, and brought it close to the matchstick his subordinate had lit. The end blackened and curled as it glowed red. Biting at its end and taking a deep suck, Ulika slowly exhaled white smoke that was tainted with light blue hues. He looked at the visitor on the single-seater opposite him and said, "This is what a cigarette is. A real cigarette. The ones in the northern continent are only suitable for children." The person sitting on the single-seater was a man in his 40s. He had a high nose, blue eyes, and gentle facial contours. His black hair was thick and curly. His skin color wasn't too dark, but neither was it fair. He resembled a mixed blood between someone from Lone and Balam. He chuckled upon hearing that as he replied in Dutanese, "Unfortunately, I have zero interest in any kind of cigarettes. Enzo, you don't know how to enjoy life at all. Before Yulika could finish his sentence, his powerful spirituality that was a result of his pathway had warned him of some danger. The way it suddenly came and appeared in such a pressing manner made Yulika instantly determine that the problem wasn't trivial. He had yet to leap away from where he was sitting when all he saw was darkness. It was as though he could directly see the night sky outside. A strong sense of sleepiness overwhelmed him, as he felt a level of serenity from the bottom of his heart. Along Canine Street, be it the houses with lit lamps or extinguished lamps, it became abnormally silent at that very moment. It was as though no living being lived in them, or that everyone had fallen asleep at the same moment. At this moment, the snoring and slumped Yulika suddenly leaped up. His eyes wore the strange combination of a reverie and lucidity. Behind him, a nearly illusory girl with pale skin was stuck to his back at some point in time. This girl's eyes were bluish-green, and her lips were jet black. Her eyes were silently looking to the side, and her ghastly pale and translucent limbs had drilled into Yulika's body as though she was a spirit that couldn't be shaken off. Her existence brought a chill to his soul body, making Yulika barely resist his abnormal sleepiness as he broke free from the influence of a nightmare. Before Yulika could completely regain his lucidity, he instinctively rushed to the staircase. Extending his palms, he exerted strength towards the front as though he was pushing a door that didn't exist. In a blink of an eye, a difficult-to-describe bronze door covered in mysterious patterns appeared in front of Yulika. It wobbled and creaked before cracking open a gap. The gap led to an endless darkness. In it were indescribable eyes that watched the outside world. Meanwhile, large amounts of squirming and strange objects that were still unrecognizable surged wildly from the gap. Yulika was about to continue exerting his strength to open the door, and cause the terrifying world behind him to descend upon Canine Street, when he suddenly saw a pair of pale, translucent palms appear out of thin air. They passed through the deep darkness and pressed down on the interior of the door's gap. The palms didn't originate from anything. They weren't connected to a body, and the wrist was bloody. It was unknown who had severed them. Both parties exerted their strength as the mysterious bronze door stopped moving. It neither closed or opened further. High above Unit 13, Soist, who was already a spirit warlock, was floating in midair thanks to an invisible force. His hands carried a sundial made of gold as he slowly raised it high. When the golden sundial was finally raised above Soist's head, its resplendent glow flowed out and quickly outlined and became one. Suddenly, another sun seemed to appear in midair, directing all the light and heat at 13, Canine Street. None of that caused any damage as they penetrated through the building and landed above the bronze door, enveloping Yulika, who was standing in front of it. Yulika instantly grimaced in extreme pain as the pale and nearly translucent girl let out a shrill scream. But it was stopped by the sunlight, and drowned by the onslaught. She warped and quickly evaporated, producing wisps of black gases that dissipated into the sea of light. There wasn't a single spot inside the building that remained dark. After the sunlight faded, the indescribable bronze door had already vanished. On the ground was a black swollen corpse that was effusing pale yellow oil stains. With a boom, the corpse tore apart as a thin, tiny figure leaped out from inside. This figure had identical looks to Yulika, but its skin was raven black as though it was stained in ink. The surface of its body that stood at a height of around 1.2 to 1.3 meters had sticky pus flowing across it. The moment he appeared, he dashed for the staircase with a ludicrous speed. Burrowing into the cellar, he opened a secret trapdoor he had prepared in advance as he dashed forward as fast as he could. In just 10 seconds, the miniaturized black version of Yulika saw the entrance. Hope. He didn't lower his guard as he gently clenched his right fist, producing about 8 transparent illusory figures from his body. They were of all kinds of shapes and sizes, as though they were an abomination that fused the characteristics of humans, plants, and certain animals. Some held Yulika's arm, others lifted his feet as they took off in flight. Right on the heels of that, a mechanical switch was shifted. Gears started rotating as the exit door flung open, leading to a silent and dark street corner. Further ahead were streets that stood on lower ground, and on the 2 sides of the streets were rows of houses. They appeared like the sea that churned with the light of the crimson moon. Yulika was just about to use the help of spirits to fly out of the secret passage and disappear into the other districts of Kolain City, when his eyes reflected a foggy lake. The lake shimmered with light, producing a tranquil beauty. In the middle, concentric circles rippled out as beautiful and illusory figures floated up. This was a powerful type of spirit. Human legends often deemed it the goddess of the lake. Many a time, the strength of a spirit guide depended on the deceased or a natural spirit they found and controlled. It was the same with spirit warlocks. However, the inclination for spirit guides were the deceased, while for spirit warlocks, they were better at controlling natural spirits. At this moment, the strange transparent figures around Yulika uttered a monotonous sound of horror. Throwing away the arms and legs they were carrying, they drilled into the thin pitch-black body like the wind. With a crash, Yulika fell to the ground, but he didn't feel any pain, which was a result of intense sleepiness assaulting him. It made him fall asleep without realizing it. At the exit, Daily Simone, who was wearing a spirit medium robe, with her face made up with blue eyeshadow and blush, walked out of some unknown location. Looking at the 1.2-meter-tall Yulika, she said, "The deceased spirit he fused with is very strange. If it doesn't use a living human's body as a house, it will quickly dissipate. We need to make every second count in order to obtain information." In the shadows beside her, Leonard Mitchell walked out. He looked at Daily Simone in surprise and said, "Aren't you a spirit guide? How do you control a goddess of the lake? Aren't you a poet? Why don't you write poems?" Daily snapped back. On the other end of the street, on a gentle cliff, a figure quickly moved downwards with the protruded pieces of rock, quickly landing in the shadowy corners of Jaw Street below him. His skin was light-colored and his eyes were blue. He had thick raven-black hair that curled slightly. He was none other than Enzo, who had been a guest at Yulika's place at Lower Lip District's 13, Canine Street. Enzo wasn't a member of the numinous episcopate. He was one of the traders of the Life School of Thought that had escaped under the enticement of the Rose School of Thought. Furthermore, he was neither a beyonder from the apothecary pathway that led to the vampire sequence, nor did he worship the primordial moon. He was only a person who didn't wish to accept the various rules set by his teacher and his teacher's teacher. He wished to lead a carefree life and take advantage of being a winner. Such a state of mind was strongly advocated by the Rose School of Thought's indulgence faction, so it didn't take long for him to formally join them, allowing him to freely satisfy all his various desires. This time he was representing the Rose School of Thought to make contact with the numinous episcopate in Kolain, and discuss the possibility of cooperating on certain matters. To his surprise, tenebrous deceased Yulika had suffered a sudden raid by the Church of Evernight. It was a high-level raid. Thankfully, I'm good at anti-divination. The Church of Evernight members didn't know ahead of time that I was at Yulika's place, and they didn't pay too much attention to me. They just thought of me as Yulika's subordinate, allowing me to find a chance to escape the core region. Besides, that sunlight mainly purifies objects with the power of death, evil, and corruption. It didn't deal much damage to me. That's likely a demigod-level attack. Enzo walked to the shadows in the street, and couldn't help but recall what had just happened. After fleeing quite a distance, he turned to look behind him, and discovered no one was chasing him. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. A winner is a winner, the eternal winner. Enzo recovered his usual confidence as he proceeded down the street with a smile. Then he turned to his left and quickly moved down the stairs. It was a steep and long staircase that reached many lower-level streets. In the vicinity of Canine Street, Soas suddenly opened his eyes and said to Leonard and Daily Simone, "There was a man named Enzo at Yulika's place. He's a member of the Rose School of Thought, and doesn't have a low sequence. He probably enjoys quite an important position. You are to quickly search the surroundings and see if you can find any traces of him, and try to capture him successfully. Don't leave any problems behind." As for the other Red Gloves and the local Nighthawks, they either had to capture the remaining numinous episcopate members, or were already capturing them in dreams. They hoped to obtain first-hand news as quickly as possible. Only a few were left behind to watch for any accidents and protect their companions. "Yes, Captain Soast." Leonard didn't hesitate to agree. Daly grabbed at the wind and cupped her hand to her ear. After listening for 2 to 3 seconds, she said, "The little guys around here tell me that someone did escape via the cliff." Chapter 909. Serving good luck on the steep and long rocky staircase, the crimson moonlight illuminated its midsection, leaving rather thick shadows along its sides. Enzo was like a normal pedestrian at night, walking a little anxiously, but without showing any signs of being flustered. He had a deep faith in his excellent good luck, being a winner in life, one that wouldn't be caught by the Nighthawks. Seeing that he would be done after a few more flights of steps, Enzo, who was once a monster, suddenly sensed something as he turned his head to look at the shadows in the lowest point of the staircase. He then saw a figure sitting there in a daze. His looks and figure appeared rather indistinct due to the lighting, and he was dressed in the standard outfit of someone from East Balam. The figure took out a box of matchsticks and struck a match to light up the surroundings. Enzo didn't bother sizing up the person when he suddenly saw a scene before his eyes. The figure threw a matchstick over as though he was gifting him something. And when the matchstick approached, it suddenly burst into a ridiculous inferno as a man wearing a formal suit and top hat walked out. Seeing scenes he shouldn't see, and hearing sounds he shouldn't hear, were a daily occurrence for a monster. Having become a winner, Enzo was already used to all of this. Without any thought, he fully believed in his intuition and lunged forward, jumping off the staircase and making 2 rolls onto the lower street. At the same time, the brown-skinned marionette, Oph, suddenly stood up. After bending his back, he hurled the matchstick in his hand at the location where Enzo was previously standing. Before the matchstick hit the ground, scarlet flames extended out into midair in a resplendent and brilliant manner. Amidst the flames, Klein's black-suited figure with a half-top hat leaped out. However, he had lost sight of his target. Klein had discovered someone rapidly coming down the staircase about 10 seconds ago, as though he was hiding from something. Suspecting that this was his new marionette, he immediately did a dream divination, and obtained the revelation that the man was related to the Rose School of Thought, and wasn't anyone good. With such a result, Klein didn't hesitate to take action. Unfortunately, due to the lack of time, he didn't have the time to use Paper Angel, which had been recorded in Creeping Hunger, to interfere with the target's spiritual intuition, and as a result, it made his ambush fail. At this moment, Oph had already left the final flight of steps on the staircase. He was running with large strides towards Enzo, who had just stood up. Enzo's mind stirred. Without dodging, he nimbly turned his body to the side, avoiding the ordinary attack. Then he drew his gun and quickly aimed. With a bang, he shot Oph's chest. As blood gushed out, Oph staggered for a moment before collapsing. His breathing rapidly weakened. Klein took this brief opportunity as his body vanished, phasing right in front of the target to block his escape route. Enzo seemed to have an inexplicable strange premonition. He immediately tightly shut his eyes. He didn't know why he did so, but as a mid-sequence beyonder of the fate pathway, believing his intuition was an instinct. Immediately after that, Enzo frantically switched directions. Attempting to rely on his spiritual intuition, he rushed into another street, but at this moment, the man in the suit who didn't have any outstanding features appeared in front of him again. Klein's figure kept disappearing and appearing in every direction, as though he was running around Enzo at high speeds, often blocking his path, but not dealing any direct attacks. Whether he used Beyonder powers or not, it made Enzo face a figure wearing a black suit and half-top hat no matter where he turned to. For an instant, Enzo with his eyes closed even imagined that he was facing a group of enemies instead of one enemy. A traveler was often able to create the effect of being besieged. In just 10 seconds, Enzo, who had failed to find a path to escape, suddenly jolted. His actions instantly slowed down as his mind and joints seemed to be injected with glue. Traveling works well with a marionettist as well. While Klein was phasing around, he kept maintaining a distance of 10 meters from Enzo. He had been secretly controlling his spirit body threads all this time. No good. He doesn't attack, and is only blocking me, not because he is waiting for the Nighthawks, but for another reason. Enzo, who still had his eyes shut, felt his heart tighten. Suddenly, he stepped onto a rock, causing his body to lose balance. He slammed heavily to the ground, causing his revolver to fly several meters away. Plop. The pain and shock had snapped Enzo out of his suppressed state. He found his fluidity again. Enzo was no stranger to such accidents. As a winner, he often obtained an advantage due to all kinds of low-probability events, and thus clinch victory. Without hesitation, he was just about to dash towards the end of the street to his side, and flip over the fence to jump into the sea, allowing what fate had arranged for him to escape his predicament when another scene flashed in his mind. In it, he was breaking out into a coughing fit, to the point of not being able to stand up or open up his stride. Ailments. The enemy can infect me with ailments. He isn't attacking me and is simply blocking my escape route in order to keep me in this area, thus infecting me with ailments in an unnoticeable manner. Enzo's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly felt a strong sense of delight. The green essence ring he wore came from a believer of the primordial moon. Upon activation, it could easily treat any ailments or injuries that weren't too serious. This is luck. Enzo pretended to not discover the infectious ailment in the air. Exerting strength in his palms, he lunged forward and followed his predetermined route towards the fence at the end of the street. Moments after he took 2 steps, he suddenly coughed and involuntarily slowed down. His coughing didn't quell like usual. Instead, it was worsening as though he was about to cough out his lungs. Klein's figure flashed and appeared behind the target while he maintained 10 meters from him. At this moment, Enzo spread his arms and allowed invisible waves to ripple out of his body. It was like a pure psyche storm that swept all spirit bodies in the vicinity, bringing with it an intense sense of drowsiness and calamity. Klein similarly had a premonition for danger. The moment Enzo spread his arms, his body had already vanished from his spot, and had appeared in the midsection of the steep staircase. Still having his eyes closed, Enzo realized that he didn't receive his desired effect. He immediately abandoned the idea of escaping after finishing his target. He continued running towards the fence at the end of the street. He had a hunch that if he stalled a little longer, a number of Nighthawks would catch up to him, making the situation more chaotic. And as a former lucky one and a winner, the more chaotic a situation, the higher the chances of him escaping. At this moment, as he had repeatedly changed directions while running blindly, he once again passed by Oph, who had been shot in the chest. On Oph's left finger was a golden ring with an inlaid ruby. A sanguine beam flashed from the beam as Oph's injuries began recovering. He bounced up and widened his mouth, biting down on Enzo who was running past. His tongue seemed to lose substance as it transformed into a blob of flesh and blood. Flower of blood. Oph wore the flower of blood ring which Klein had obtained from Mr. X. It could randomly allow the wearer to abandon any rationality in order to become a beast. On the other hand, it could allow the wearer to control their body at a deeper level. As long as they didn't suffer from instant death or become completely purified, they could heal from any kind of injury. At the same time, it also came with flesh and blood magic. It was a mystical item that was very suited for marionettes. Before Klein came out to seek a new marionette, he didn't know which pathway or sequence his target would be. Therefore, to make well-rounded preparations, he made Oph wear the flower of blood ring. This way, he could direct a play of him being the main assailant with the marionette as the secondary assailant, but in fact, it was the exact opposite. Just as Enzo ran past Oph, he felt a stabbing pain in his knee as though his previous fall had given him some light injuries. The moment this thought flashed across his mind, he hurriedly crouched down and felt a figure fly past his head. It missed. Oph's sudden attack still failed to be effective against a winner. Enzo was just about to smile and run again when he suddenly had a premonition. He subconsciously curled up and protected his vital spots. At the same time, Oph suddenly swelled up and silently exploded. Flesh and blood formed a storm, sweeping through a rather large area in the vicinity, hitting Enzo again and again. One of the preparations Klein had done was to use a power of creeping hunger after its mutation. He had planted a flesh bomb in his marionette's body. With a clank, the golden ring with an inlaid ruby landed on the stone slabs in the street. Klein's figure flashed to Enzo's side. He raised his left palm and made his palm pitch black. As though they were formed of granules, he said a word filled with evil and corruption. Slow. Thanks to his luck, Enzo had avoided most of the damage. His lightly injured body suddenly turned still as his struggling actions slowed down. His curled pose changed bit by bit. Right on the heels of that, he opened his eyes due to the pain, and a figure wearing a black suit and half-top hat was reflected in his eyes. Ah! Enzo let out a tragic cry as he raised his hands to cover his eyes. Streams of blood seeped out from the gaps in his fingers. Monster? Looking at his writhing target, Klein pricked up his brows. He continued controlling the spirit body threads and quickly achieved initial control. This time, there weren't any accidents that broke the subsequent procedure. In a half-crazy state with scales growing from his body, Enzo was powerless to resist. Klein rather smoothly deepened his control. Time ticked by when Enzo suddenly stood up and converged the protruded snake-like scales. He pressed his hand to his chest and bowed at Klein. Then he walked to the side and bent down to pick up the golden ring with the inlaid ruby. Wearing it on his left hand's index finger, it matched the emerald ring on his other hand. Klein held back the urge of looking at himself with his new marionette. He got Enzo to clear up the scene of the remnant flesh and any traces left behind. After doing all of this, he walked into the shadows with his marionette and quickly vanished. Chapter 9-10 Monster Pathway. A few minutes later, Daly Simone and Leonard Mitchell, who had repeatedly made errors in judgment, finally arrived at the top of the steep staircase. They proceeded down the steps at a very slow speed, cautious of their surroundings, and they were ready to enter combat at any moment. However, they failed to encounter any abnormalities even when they reached the bottom of the flight of stairs. They didn't even find any useful clues. Daly grabbed onto the wind, cupped her hand to her ear, and listened carefully. A few seconds later, she looked around her and said, "There was a gunshot. A weapon once dropped around the street bend. That man named Enzo is dead." "Who did it?" Leonard asked in surprise. From his point of view, due to the repeated failures they had encountered, Enzo had easily escaped their pursuit. The possibility of a Rose School of Thought monitor silencing him and wiping away any clues was zero. If that were the case, who could have killed that Beyonder who was suspected to be a Sequence 5 or 6? It needed to be mentioned that the Red Gloves had used a sealed artifact to implement anti-divination before they carried out tonight's operation. It was unlikely for anyone to predict it ahead of time and wait there to hunt the escaping Enzo. Daly shook her head. Those little guys didn't see anything. It's likely a Beyonder who's good at anti-divination. Perhaps it's Enzo's enemy, and they had been planning to act tonight. She simply offered a guess of hers, and the duo began independently searching the nearby streets to see if they could find any missed clues. Taking this opportunity, Leonard circled to a fence in a particular street. Suppressing his tone, he asked, "Old man, did you discover anything?" Inside him, Pallas Zorost replied after 3 seconds, "You should have heard a tragic scream, and had used that to correct the direction of your pursuit effort. It was let out by Enzo. He had apparently seen something extremely terrifying and indescribable. Something that could directly cause damage and corruption to his soul body." Leonard was taken aback for a moment. He narrowed his eyes as he repeated softly, "Extremely terrifying and indescribable." Inside the inn, Klein teleported back with his new marionette. He then made his marionette stand to his side as he sat down. As he sized up his marionette, he sighed. "A Beyonder of the monster pathway. But he's still inferior to Senor. There's no way for him to hide in a gold coin for ease of transport. I can only let him follow beside me. From his Beyonder sequence, he isn't a core member of the Rose School of Thought, but his sequence isn't too low. Some importance must have been placed on him. That also means that if I don't disguise him, it's very easy for me to be targeted by the Rose School of Thought. On the contrary, I can probably use him as bait to fish for another wraith. When the time comes, he can walk alone while I hide 200 meters away to wait for the bait to be hooked. No, I can't. I mustn't let greed get to my head. The southern continent is where the Rose School of Thought is active. Once I expose my location, with how much importance the Mother Tree of Desire places on me, not only will a saint come, even an angel might appear. Yes, it's better if I disguise this marionette. As a faceless, I'm quite skilled at disguises. Then I'll continue using mystical methods to find my next marionette. I'll wait for Danitz to finish his investigation, and for Mr. Azik to come find me. Klein quickly made up his mind. Using a myriad of means, he gained an understanding of his new marionette's level and beyonder powers. He was a Sequence 5 winner of the Fate pathway. In this pathway, a Sequence 9 monster was one who had super high spiritual perception. They often heard sounds others couldn't hear, and also see things others couldn't see. This allowed them to occasionally see the future, and have an acute intuition for danger. Beyonders of this sequence often entered a state of enlightenment as they muttered indecipherable words. It was the reason why they were treated as real monsters. As for the corresponding Sequence 8 robot, the Beyonders would obtain terrifying calculation skills and precise control. The various parts of their bodies in those aspects would be clearly boosted, making them talented at close combat and shooting. At the same time, they also had the powers of divination and anti-divination. Sequence 7 was named Lucky 1 or Lucky. Beyonders of this level frequently encountered lucky events in their daily lives, like finding money on the street, having enemies miss shots aimed at them, getting dice rolls as they wished, and having women they liked to also like them back. However, their luck wasn't fixed and would fluctuate. At times, they were especially lucky, and at other times they were no different from an ordinary person. Therefore, it wasn't something that could be relied upon, and one had to temper one's expectations. Sequence 6 was Calamity Priest. On the one hand, Beyonders could passively suffer all kinds of calamities, but they could foresee it and make preparations to eliminate or mitigate the effects. On the other hand, they would actively attract different kinds of calamities, affecting a target and enemy as a result. Then, using one's advantage of being lucky, avoid most of the danger and attack during the chaos. To put it simply, they could pull their opponents into a situation where they could take advantage of their strengths the best. Of course, many Calamity Priests could use the dangers of their own passive encounters to attack their enemies. Meanwhile, Calamity Priests could create psyche storms. Using their spirituality that surpassed that of other pathways, they could directly affect their opponents' soul bodies, causing them to feel dizzy and lost. If a Calamity Priest's enemy entered such a state, they were extremely prone to making errors. It caused the calamity to snowball, and eventually devour them. And at Sequence 5 winner, Beyonders could control their luck to a certain extent. They could use their own temperance to accumulate large amounts of luck. At critical moments, they could dramatically reduce any dangers to their life multiple times. From time to time, they could also encounter beneficial situations that have extremely low probabilities in their daily lives. For example, due to someone's mistakes, they might receive an inheritance. The strange, comedic way they walked caused them to catch the fancy of a member of the opposite sex. Or their enemies who were pursuing them would foolishly get lost or make errors in judgment. At this level, Beyonders of the Fate pathway had a very keen sense of foresight. Be it divination or anti-divination, they were mysticism experts. In addition, they could also give their enemies bad luck to a certain extent, making their targets become unlucky. Beyonders of the monster pathway are really extreme. Apart from the spirituality and fate domain, they almost have zero Beyonder powers. Even their constitution and calculation skills are provided at robot. The subsequent advancements give rather limited improvements. This is my ideal model for a charlatan. They do not have any offensive or defensive abilities, simply relying on their premonition, and how fate blesses them. I have to say that this is the most special path out of the 22 Beyonder pathways. I can find or guess their neighboring pathways. Only Monster seems rather asocial. It seems to be a lonely one. Perhaps, the Beyonder pathway that focuses on fate is destined to be lonely? Klein silently reflected on the matter, and had some ideas regarding the usage of his marionette. Of course, he still needed to carry out divinations above the gray fog. He needed to see if the passive good luck and calamities still existed after the Beyonder's actual death. If it really was present, Klein had to constantly face the trials of calamities. In comparison, Admiral of Bloodsignor is still better as a marionette. Sigh, people only know how to cherish and regret once things are gone. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating chortle. From the traits of the monster pathway, he thought of a few effective means to deal with their mid and low sequence Beyonders. First, It was to catch them by surprise, to let them see him directly. They would directly see the gray fog or other images, causing them to suffer a catharsis of the mind and receive damage to their bodies, pushing them to the brink of losing control. Second, it was to throw a special item out, causing them to face the test of seeing what shouldn't be seen and hear what shouldn't be heard. In this aspect, Klein had a blood crystal that came from a high-level devil that could produce such an effect. Blatherer's aura. Third, it was to entice them to give him bad luck and pretend to act unlucky, so as to have an opportunity to strike back. Amidst his thoughts, Klein made the marionette empty his pockets, producing £35 10 solely 7 pence and a leather wallet. The wallet's surface and interior had a flower and name embroidered on it. It appeared to be completely handcrafted. Enzo. Whether that's your name or not, your name is Enzo. Klein shot a glance at his marionette as he moved his gaze down to the golden ring with the inlaid emerald on his right hand. Via divination, he learned that the ring was named Green Essence. It had one effect: treat any ailments or injuries that weren't too serious. And it was precisely because of this that its negative effects were trivial. It only attracted mosquitoes. Thankfully, I'm not the one wearing it. Monster Pathway Beyonders don't seem to wear many mystical items. Even if they do, they will wear one or two rather low-level ones. This is a requirement of fate? Klein retracted his gaze in thought, and looked at Enzo, who was staring at the wall. He had an urge grow within him. He wished to use his Monster Pathway marionette to look at himself. He wanted to know what was so special about him. Will this be very dangerous? I'll lose control as a result even if I'm seeing myself? No, back in Tingen City, Adamasol had also looked straight at me without being a sequence 9. The only thing that happened was having his eyes bleed and be in a state of pain for a while. Although I have improved drastically from then. Winner Enzo didn't directly break down when he saw me just now. The reaction resembled my reaction when seeing Demoness of Despair Panatia's partial mythical creature form. Do a divination above the gray fog? No, that involves the gray fog itself. The outcome will definitely be interfered with. Rely on my own divination powers in the real world? Klein took out a gold coin and let it run through his fingers. After a while, the gold coin bounced up and fell down into Klein's palm. Chapter 9:11 Strange scene. Klein looked down at his palm as his eyes reflected the gold coin. It was heads. This meant that Klein should use the marionette's eyes to look at himself. After receiving this revelation, Klein remained hesitant. He pondered about holding a ritual to send Enzo above the gray fog. Doing so was relatively safer, allowing the damage and corruption his spirit body suffered to be completely screened by the environment before making an attempt. However, he suspected that he wouldn't receive an outcome. This was because Beyonders of the Fate Pathway were noticing the projection of the mysterious space on his body. Above the gray fog, that uniqueness might no longer exist. It was like an attempt to observe an elephant's body. Instead of doing it outside, he was doing it internally. Pressing his fingers together, he clenched the gold coin in silence for a long while before making up his mind. He suddenly stood up, took out a ritual dagger, and created a wall of spirituality to isolate the room. This was to prevent anyone from hearing the possible screams or strange commotion. Immediately after that, Klein set up a ritual and sacrificed creeping hunger above the gray fog. He was afraid that the glove would turn on him when something happened to him. This was a fixed trait of creeping hunger itself. Once it didn't have its fill and couldn't secure a schedule of eating one person a day, it would view its wearer as food. And Klein starved it more often than he fed it. After doing all the preparations in a meticulous and orderly manner, Klein reached out to take the flower of blood from Enzo and wore it on his left palm. This ensured that he could recover even if he suffered any serious physical damage. At the moment he was about to wear it, Klein thought for a moment and paused. Taking a piece of paper, he wrote, "Remember to take off the ring." He was worried that he wouldn't take flower of blood off after his experiment, due to his lowered intelligence. When that happens, perhaps I need a beautiful princess to wake me up with a kiss. No, take off my ring. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and exhaled. Removing his outerwear, he wore the ring. Then he cast his gaze at his new marionette, Winner Enzo. The sense of crisis and nervousness was inevitable, but as long as he made up his mind, the experienced him could only forge ahead without flinching. After doing some adjustments and entering a state of cogitation, Klein made the marionette slowly turn around to look at him. With the winner's eyes, he first saw a layer of thin, emanating grayish-white fog. Amidst the fog, there was a resplendent door of light that was tainted with bluish blackness. The door of light was formed from countless layers of spherical light. Each spherical light enveloped squirming maggots. Some of them were transparent, others translucent. They had complicated and indescribable symbols and patterns that had profound meanings. Before Klein could discern the actual details, he felt his mind buzz as he lost consciousness. After an unknown period of time, he slowly woke up. He had momentarily lost his memory, almost imagining that he had slept till daybreak. What happened? It's still dark outside. Klein sat up with a push of his hands, only to realize that he was on the ground. At this moment, he caught sight of Enzo through the corner of his eye. Plenty of scenes and voices suddenly surged through his mind. That's right. I was trying to figure out what Beyonders of the monster pathway can see from my body. I suffered too much stimulation and fainted immediately. I still vaguely remember painful screaming. Was that me? Klein, who had recovered his memories, hurriedly inspected his condition. He was surprised to see a bloody, gruesome wound on his body, as though something was about to tear out of it. At this moment, flesh was squirming in the wound, reforming at an abnormally fast speed. Klein then looked to the ground, and saw that there was blood that had outlined a silhouette of where he was lying down. Thankfully, I wore flower of blood. Otherwise, I might have slowly died due to the heavy injuries brought about by the breakdown of my body. After I resurrect, I wonder if I'll be in a human form or a monster form. Klein raised his hand and rubbed his temples as he scanned his surroundings. He found that the furniture had toppled, but the wall of spirituality remained intact. He heaved a sigh of relief, confirming that the abnormality was only limited to himself and a small area around him. Nothing had spread, and from the speed at which his wound was recovering at, Klein determined that he hadn't been unconscious for more than a minute. He picked up the chair and sat down, feeling as though he had forgotten something, but he just couldn't recall what. Only when he instinctively cleared the area did he see a note with the words, "Remember to take off the ring." Only then was he enlightened as he removed the golden ruby ring on his left hand. More memories surfaced as Klein shook his head and muttered with a lingering sense of fear and amusement. Luck is really important at times. If the negative effects of the flower of blood randomly reached its peak potency, I might not be able to recognize those words and fail to be reminded. Seeing that he had mostly recovered from his wound, he made Enzo wear flower of blood and take off green essence. Using the latter's treatment, Klein no longer felt any discomfort. He focused his attention back on the scene he saw. It was a scene that Beyonders of the Fate pathway saw on him. A door of light tainted with bluish black. Countless spherical lights. Transparent and translucent maggots clumped together. Symbols and patterns that are mystically complicated, hiding plenty of knowledge, but giving zero feedback to others. What do these represent? This is a particular mythical creature form that corresponds to the mysterious space above the gray fog. It's one that belongs to a sequence, O true God. Due to the gray fog's screening, only Beyonders of the Fate pathway can see it directly, suffering the visual impact and corruption. Likewise, it's also because of the gray fog screening that those Beyonders don't directly break down as though they are seeing a deity with their own eyes while also not receiving any knowledge. Klein thought for a moment, and began to use divination to decipher the hidden meaning. The door of light seems to resemble the symbol behind the apprentice's chair. It might also point to Mr. Door. Countless stacked spherical light is identical to my cogitation, and the latter stems from the mythical systems as described by some novels from Earth. Influenced, my subconscious chose the most relevant and closely matching memory? Or could it be that my choice influences the expression of the scene from the gray fog? The distorted and transparent maggots are similar to the clump of maggots on the gigantic throne on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range, but there are some tiny differences. That sequence, O the Fool of the Seer pathway? I didn't manage to see the translucent ones clearly. It's hard to tell. Also, The bluish-black color keeps making me connect it to the depths of the mysterious space that I can't reach. Back when I stood on the highest step of the staircase of light, I could see some hints of bluish-black on the cloud-like mass that condensed in midair. Klein thought about it for quite some time but failed to receive an answer. All he could do was keep it at the back of his mind and analyze it when he had more information and clues. After clearing the scene, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. He planned on doing a thorough inspection of his physical condition and confirm if Enzo still had any passive luck or bad luck. Biam. In the poverty district, in a dilapidated house that wasn't too big, Admiral of Stars Katlia was sitting behind a table looking at the door when she heard a unique knocking pattern on the door. "Come on in." She didn't deliberately disguise her voice. The wooden door creaked open as the hanged man walked in, wearing a hooded black robe. Seeing his suspicious disguise, Katlia nudged her heavy glasses and said with a smile, "If you were to walk out like this, you would be surrounded by the members of the Church of Storms within 5 minutes." She didn't wear any disguise because she knew that the matter of her permitting Gehrman Sparrow to board the Future had long spread across the seas. It wasn't difficult for the hanged man to guess that Admiral of Stars was Ma'am Hermit. Alger didn't directly reply to her. As he closed the door, he pulled out a chair and snapped back. "It's the same for you." He meant that Admiral of Stars was just second to Admiral Hell amongst the 7 pirate admirals. Furthermore, she was suspected to have deep connections to Gehrman Sparrow. She was a target of pursuit by the Church of Storms and Church of Evernight. Her bounty had risen to £45,000, and no matter which city she was in, it only spelled trouble once she was recognized due to not being disguised. Katlia nodded slightly and turned to look at the hanged man's hooded face. "In front of me, such a disguise is meaningless. However, I respect your choice." She continued, wearing her glasses. "She has a domineering stance and great confidence." As expected of the Admiral of Stars, Alger, who was wearing a mask under the hood, didn't harp on the disguise as he went straight to the point. "Thank you for providing me with assistance." Katlia placed her right hand on her left elbow. "I'm curious. With your present strength and the resources you have, you should be able to resolve the artisan's problem even without my help. Why are you being excessive?" Alger was already prepared as he succinctly replied, "I do not wish to become a topic of discussion for others." Katlia seemed to grasp the meaning in between the lines. Pondering for a few seconds, she said, "I need more information." Alger nodded lightly and said, "According to my observations and guesses, the artisan is likely controlled by those who believe in the primordial moon. The latter belong to the original faction of the southern continent, not the traders of the life school of thought." Katlia's expression remained unperturbed as she thought for a moment. "Why don't you find Mr. Moon? He should be very interested in such matters." Alger curled his lips and replied in a normal tone, "If we aren't able to resolve it, I might do so." Chapter 9:12 Origins of the Artisan. Katlia understood the hanged man. If the problem was too serious, they could use the moon to involve the entire Sanguine race. They could then minimize their losses in the chaos and obtain some benefits. She then smiled and said, "If the situation is that serious, why not directly find the world? That seems to make things simple." Alger remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "I have to prove my ability at handling problems. Therefore, that's the final resort." After hearing his reply, Katlia immediately made some connections. The hanged man places great importance on the way Gehrman Sparrow views him. It's because he's a blessed of Mr. Fool? Also, his attitude is rather identical to the political jokes of Backlund and Trier. When facing a problem or having committed a mistake, the first reaction is to suppress the matter and find other methods to resolve it. They cannot let their superior or consignor know about it. This means that the hanged man was once or is currently a member of a powerful faction with a strict hierarchy. It influenced him and made him grasp similar traits. The Church of Storms? No, such a person would be an oddity. The fleet of the King of the Five Seas? Amidst her thoughts, the pirate admiral nudged her heavy glasses and steered the topic back. Continued describing the artisan. Alger appeared to have prepared a script. Without any thought or pause, he said in an unhurried manner, "To hide this artisan's identity, to prevent this resource from being wielded by others, I deliberately constructed the identity of him being part of the Church of Steam. But in fact, he had no choice but to create items for unaffiliated Beyonders to earn money to maintain his lifestyle of enjoying fine wine and beauties. He betrayed the Church of Steam and hid in Byam. This time he first contracted a strange disease, and was monitored by an unknown person. Later, he seemed to be under control of people who believe in the primordial moon, claiming that he could receive new life." Katlia finished listening attentively as her eyes with a purple tint appeared extremely focused. After the hanged man finished his recount, she pondered and asked, "An artisan definitely has no lack of mystical items. Furthermore, they know all the combinations of different Beyonder effects and negative effects. Their strength is definitely at sequence 5. What methods did those primordial moon believers use to control this artisan without harming him? A demigod was involved?" Alger slowly shook his head. "There aren't any clues regarding that, but based on my observation, the artisan has expressed some willingness. I suspect that while being threatened and coerced, there are elements of them targeting his weaknesses to entice him." He had indirectly denied the theory that a demigod was involved. Katlia nodded. "How did those primordial moon believers find this artisan?" "Based on your description, this artisan only trades with trustworthy friends he's familiar with. He doesn't enjoy widening his channels, and he can be said to be extremely cautious." Alger hesitated for a moment and said, "I'm not too sure, but I have a theory. I once helped the world sell a werewolf Beyonder characteristic to that artisan, and the werewolf pathway belongs to the mutant pathway. Be it the formulas or characteristics, they are firmly in the control of the Rose School of Thought. There are seldom any leaks. Likewise, those people who believe in the primordial moon in the southern continent basically belong to the Rose School of Thought." Katlia added inwardly, having figured out the hanged man's theory. He suspected that the werewolf Beyonder characteristic had a latent problem that involved a secret existence. This resulted in the artisan being targeted by the Rose School of Thought. And this was also the reason why the Rose School of Thought firmly wielded control over the mutant pathway's formula and characteristics. Katlia raised a few more questions and obtained satisfactory answers. Finally, she asked, "What's that artisan's name? What country is he from?" "He's from Intis. He calls himself Sealf," Alger replied straight away. "Sealf?" Katlia frowned slightly as she repeated the artisan's name softly. "What's wrong with that?" Upon seeing this, Alger directly asked, "You've heard of him?" From Alger's point of view, Admiral of Stars was an experienced powerhouse with a powerful background, and was good at controlling herself. If she hadn't wished to discuss Sealf, she wouldn't have made it so clear even if she had her suspicions and questions. Due to this, he chose to ask without mincing his words. After a moment of silence, Katlia said, "Emperor Rosel's eldest son is Seal. It's very similar to that name." Without waiting for the hanged man to say a word, she continued, "This prince passed away due to his horror and concerns shortly after the emperor's assassination. Back then, the Sauron family wished to hang or exile his descendants, but the Church of Steam chose to take him in as a clergyman." Alger nodded slightly in enlightenment. "You suspect that he's a descendant of that prince?" In most countries in the northern continent like Intis and Fasak, it was common for people to use their ancestor's name, or something similar as their names. It represented the legacy of honor. Therefore, the more illustrious a family was, the more common it was to have the second or the third. Of course, it was also very common for two people to have similar names, but Artisan Sealf wasn't only a name. He was from the Church of Steam, a person from Intis, and had reached the level of artisan. Faced with the hanged man's question, Katlia nodded gently. "I can quickly make a confirmation if you can obtain his blood." Understanding the reason, Alger didn't ask further. Instead, he asked, "Are you going to take action now? I can provide support." Katlia's glasses reflected the crimson moonlight that shone inwards. "No, I plan on observing for some time. At the very least, we need to understand why the people who believe in the primordial moon are trying to control Artisan Sealf. If they only wish to get the artisan to work for them and create mystical items, the situation becomes a lot more simple. And if they have other goals, the problem might be more complicated than we imagined. We will need to make more preparations. As expected of the Admiral of Stars, Alger nodded and said, I can't stay in Byam for too long, or else I will incur suspicion. If you need my assistance, it needs to be fast. After receiving confirmation from her, the hanged man slowly got up and pulled up his hood before leaving the room. Having learned where Artisan Sealf was presently living, Katlia removed her heavy glasses and pinched her glabella. Clapping, she said, Heath, come in. In the shadows of the door gap, the darkness suddenly stirred as a thin and tall but pale figure appeared. His nose bridge was ridiculously high, and his facial skin was nearly transparent. Looking ill, he was none other than the second mate of the future, Rose Bishop Heath Doyle. Katlia looked at him and said, The actual situation is, I'll leave the rest to you. Yes, Captain. Heath Doyle simply replied before shrinking back into the shadows. Katlia raised her right hand and paused for a few seconds. Stay away from Frank for the time being. He had reached a standstill in his mushroom experiments. I'm afraid that he will come up with new ideas. The location of my second marionette. Klein held 2 branches as he repeatedly chanted without seeing them move. This meant a divination failure, or that Colane City didn't have a second marionette that suited him well. From the looks of it, mysticism methods are temporarily useless. I'll pack up tomorrow and leave. Klein mumbled and threw the branches into the trash can. Standing beside him was Enzo. Although he didn't dare to directly look at his master, and was only looking at the ground, he skillfully made a cup of black tea and offered it to Klein. Compared to before, this winter now had red skin that was nearly peeling due to sunburn. After all of this turned for the better, he would have a swarthy tan. To disguise his new marionette and prevent the Rose School of Thought from recognizing him, Klein had brought this gentleman on a trip to the beach which received strong sunlight. He was then left exposed to the sun for prolonged periods of time. Meanwhile, he controlled the marionette to shave off most of his hair, leaving a thin layer. With the trimming of his brows, contouring his face with powder, and wearing shades, Enzo seemed to transform into another person. Even the most familiar of friends of his might find it difficult to recognize him, unless the person was a faceless. Apart from a disguise in the real world, Klein also did some mysticism management. Firstly, he used the paper angel's embrace, and second, he carried Azek's copper whistle along with it. In addition, he also determined that a winner's passive luck and calamity trait was ineffective. However, he had no idea if it was because of its status as a marionette, or if it was due to the gray fog. Receiving the tea and taking a sip, Klein cast his gaze at the map of East and West Balam on the coffee table. He considered where he could find his second marionette. At this moment, the colors around him suddenly saturated as though an artist had contoured the area with paint. Right on the heels of that, a figure appeared beside Enzo. He was wearing a silk top hat and a black suit. With a medium build, he had bronze skin and eyes that seemed to see the vicissitudes of life. He had soft facial features, and beneath his right ear was a tiny black mole. He was none other than Azek Eggers. Mr. Azek is finally here. Klein was first delighted before he noticed that he had appeared beside his marionette. This made an amusing scene surface in his mind. Mr. Azek, who had relied on the copper whistle to locate him, had done the same as he usually did, grabbing the copper whistle's wielder by the shoulder, and had left using the spirit world the moment he appeared. And all Klein could do was watch helplessly, trying to stop him with outstretched arms. But being a tad bit slow, he couldn't help but clam up. Azek appeared more reticent than before. Looking at Klein, who had a new face, he asked, "Are you ready?" Chapter 9:13 Klein's preparatory work ready. Of course not. Klein smiled as he pointed at Enzo. That glove still needs sealing. As he spoke, the badly sunburnt Enzo removed the human-skinned glove from his right hand with his left hand, which wore the flower of blood and green essence rings. It was creeping hunger. Normally, Klein tended to throw creeping hunger above the gray fog when it wasn't in use. After all, the glove's original seal had been disabled after its mutation. It needed to consume a living person on a daily basis, otherwise it would feast on the wearer. However, considering how Mr. Azik had already replied, it was very likely that he would meet him soon. Finally, he decided to keep creeping hunger in the real world, unless there were unique circumstances. After all, he could already imagine the scene of Mr. Azik arriving. He didn't wish for such a conversation to happen. Didn't you say that the glove needs sealing? Yes. Give me a second. I need to use the washroom. Or, are you ready? No. Give me a second. I need to use the washroom. Just the thought of a similar scene and similar line embarrassed Klein, making him feel awkward. Even if he didn't consider the possibility of Mr. Azik realizing the secret of the gray fog, this would also affect his impression of him. Therefore, after obtaining a new marionette and completing his attempt at looking at himself, Klein brought creeping hunger back to the real world, making up for its previous meal. Unlike before, the wearer was now Enzo. Aside from that, to restrain creeping hunger's urge to eat a person on a daily basis, Klein carried a few normal mushrooms with him. He also made the marionette maintain a distance of at least 5 meters from him. Upon hearing his words and seeing the marionette's actions, Azik nodded and reached out to receive the human-skinned glove. Taking this opportunity, Klein took out a few mushrooms from his pocket and threw them into the nearby trash can. Pa! He snapped his fingers, igniting the mushrooms within a scarlet flame. However, it didn't affect anything around it. This was his flame-controlling power from being a magician. After completing this action and seeing Mr. Azik inevitably glance over, Klein chuckled dryly. The unforeseen development back then has made creeping hunger a little afraid of mushrooms. I'm using its weakness to restrain its usual urges. In fact, there wasn't much point in doing so because carrying the mushrooms restrained creeping hunger. It made the starving sealed artifact immediately lash back the moment the mushrooms disappeared. Unless there was any easily obtainable food in front of it, it would end up aiding the enemy. Mushroom! Azik muttered as he held the glove which had blood stains on its surface. He made the surroundings suddenly turn dark as the sunlight outside was prohibited from entering. Ghastly white, dark green complicated symbols, labels and patterns appeared out of thin air. They appeared to be calligraphed by invisible wraiths, shadows and spirit bodies. They meshed together in midair, forming a mysterious, illusory double bronze door that seemed to lead to another world. It was a deep, silent and terrifying world. The illusory door shrank and finally landed on creeping hunger, causing its blood stains to rapidly recede, making it mostly white. A few seconds later, this human-skinned glove returned to normal. It was still a thin layered glove, and even without any suppressive effect from the mushrooms, it didn't express any signs of mania or urges. It's like how it was before. Azik handed creeping hunger to Klein. Having a big shot backing you sure feels good. Klein reflected inwardly and earnestly thanked him before wearing creeping hunger on his left hand. He thought for a moment and raised a matter. Mr. Azik, while I was carrying your copper whistle, while passing through the Berserk Sea, I had the same dream repeatedly. The main theme of the dream is darkness and coldness. In an inverted underground mausoleum, there were countless coffins with a deceased body inside. On their backs were dense white feathers. Those feathers were tainted with pale yellow oil. And deep inside the mausoleum was a blob of black fog that enveloped everything. In the dream, you and I were exploring the mausoleum. We triggered something, causing the black fog to produce panting sounds as thin illusory black tubes were extended. I would jolt myself awake whenever I reached this point in the dream. This seems to be similar to the byproduct of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project that previously appeared. Klein described in detail his divination of the copper whistle as a dream. He did this as a warning to Mr. Azik, as if to say that he shouldn't be too careless. After all, dream divination was, in a sense, equivalent to a dream, and Azik knew that he was a beyonder of the seer pathway. Having such an encounter wasn't anything odd. Having a revelation from a normal dream and getting a revelation from a dream divination only differed in one way, one being passive and the other active. Azik finished listening silently without cutting Klein off. At the end of that, he nodded and said, "It's likely related to something death left in the Berserk Sea. From the looks of it, the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project has had some qualitative progress. Mr. Azek lives up to being a fourth epic death consul. He doesn't belittle my dream at all. Klein raised his right hand and rubbed his face, turning into Gehrman Sparrow. He then said, I only have one more thing I need to prepare. I need to confirm if Admiral Hell Ludwell isn't somewhere dangerous, and that there aren't any numinous episcopate demigods around him. As for whether the Murloc cufflink was still on the ship, Klein didn't mention it. This was because he would check on it every few days. He believed that Admiral Hell had yet to discover the mystical item, or he might have already discovered it but had deliberately not moved it, hoping to lay an ambush for the crazy adventurer. Gehrman Sparrow, when he visited Azek, replied calmly, That can be confirmed when we are nearby. All right. Klein immediately made Enzo walk to the coat rack and pull out the golden cane. Seeing that there was nothing else, Azek reached out his right hand and grabbed Klein's shoulder. Klein also reached out his right palm to grab onto Enzo's shoulder. The surrounding colors suddenly changed. The reds became redder, and the blacks became blacker. They stacked against each other but were bright and discordant. The two men and the marionette began passing through the spirit world as the black gold inlaid cane danced ahead, pointing out the direction of Klein's lost Murloc cufflink. Before long, the cane fell down and was suspended in midair. Azek terminated the traveling, but they remained in the spirit world. He seemed to be watching something or listening in on something. After 2 to 3 seconds he said, There aren't any problems. With that said, he brought Klein while Klein brought his marionette out of the spirit world. Meanwhile, Klein recalled the time he searched for clues to Azek's memories. Back then, the target was the ancient chronicles that Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy possessed. Back then, Azek had said the problem isn't serious, but in the end he faced Demoness of Unaging Katerina. There aren't any problems. Alright, since you say so. Klein lampooned as he sized up his surroundings. It was a rather familiar environment. It was a huge ship with a mainly dark color with a ghostly green to it. It had a black tulip flag, as well as zombies, skeletons, wraiths, shadows, and other undying creatures. These creatures either directed the sails, patrolled the area, or did cannon drills. All of that proved that it was the flagship, Black Tulip, of Admiral Hell. Unlike Klein's last encounter, the Black Tulip had quite a number of living beyonders. The silver-masked captain with an exaggerated rapier, frilly shirt, a gorgeous coat, and a triangular hat with a white skull on it, Admiral Hell Ludwell, was standing by the cabin's entrance looking over. Suddenly, the black ring on Ludwell's right hand trembled and glimmered. The pale white flame in the arrogant pirate admiral's eyes wavered and finally constricted to its limits. Immediately, Ludwell bent his back, prostrated to the ground in front of Azek Eggers, and kissed the deck under the gaze of the either glazed, surprised, or lifeless eyes. Chapter 9:14 The Calling. Deep inside the mausoleum, upon seeing Admiral Hell Ludwell's reaction, Klein and the living crew of the Black Tulip could hardly believe their eyes. He originally imagined 2 scenarios. The first was Ludwell requesting help from a numinous episcopate demigod to ambush Gehrman Sparrow, and the powerhouse backing him. This wasn't impossible since Sequence 7 of the Death Pathway was called Spirit Medium. They also had the ability to sense impending danger. The second was that Admiral Hell hadn't made any preparations. He tried resisting but ended up being easily finished off by Mr. Azek. Klein's plan was to have Mr. Azek deal with the demigod while he hunted Admiral Hell in the first scenario, so as to obtain his second marionette. If it were the second scenario, he could request Mr. Azek to watch by the side as he controlled his marionette to challenge Ludwell alone. During this process, he would use creeping hunger and hide in the shadows, doing his best to stay behind the scenes so as to digest his marionette potion faster. To his surprise, Admiral Hell didn't put up a fight at all. He directly prostrated himself and kissed the deck as though he was Azek's most loyal and humble servant. How are we going to come to blows now? Klein stared ahead blankly, somewhat at a loss for words. And it was silent across the ship. Azek raised his hand and pressed down on his silk hat, as he walked towards the prostrating Ludwell at a decent pace. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He stopped in front of Ludwell and said with a deep voice, "What stage has the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project reached?" Ludwell kept his forehead peeled to the ground as he hoarsely replied, "Artificial death can already influence high-sequence beyonders who failed their advancements, but it is still unable to reply to prayers and rituals." After the description, he slightly raised his torso and took off the black, square-shaped ring from his right hand. Then with both hands he offered it in front of him. Silently, the ring seemed to be dragged by countless spirit bodies as it flew up and landed in Azek's palm. Azek studied it for a few seconds before wearing it on his left index finger. Suddenly, a terrifying and profound feeling was emanated from his body. The zombies and skeletons who were either naked or wearing rotten leather armor, genuflected, bowing their heads as though they only dared to look at his boots. The flying wraiths and shadows landed on the deck and clung closely to it. None of them dared to float in midair again. The other pirates aboard the ship plopped to their knees, plastering their faces to the deck without daring to raise them. Klein stood to the side, watching Mr. Azek's back and the suddenly empty scene. He turned agape, but he didn't say a word. Azek took another 2 steps forward and came to Admiral Hell's side. Then, he turned his body and faced Klein and said to Ludwell, "You shall be his marionette for a year. When the time is up, you can return to the spirit world." Azek said those words without any inflection, as though he wasn't determining Admiral Hell's life and death or future. Perhaps, to him, this was a trivial matter that didn't need him to care for the thoughts and feelings of the person being ordered. Ludwell's body shook violently as though he was furious and indignant. But ultimately he didn't raise his head. He continued keeping his head peeled to the deck. "Yes, Honorable Death Consul." Just as he said that, ghastly white and dark green mysterious symbols were accentuated as they meshed together, forming an illusory bronze door. The door rapidly contracted and was imprinted inside Admiral Hell's forehead. Klein looked in surprise and puzzlement. Only when Mr. Azek nodded at him and pointed to Admiral Hell did he blankly step forward and enter a 10-meter radius. He began controlling Ludwell's spirit body threads. The pirate admiral almost leaped up a few times to flail his arms, but none of that happened. Soon, his thoughts turned sluggish as he subconsciously resisted. After a while, the silver-masked Admiral Hell Ludwell stood up. Bowing his head, he retreated to Klein's side and stood beside Winner Enzo. Azek watched the entire process in silence before finally slowly saying, "In the death pathway, high-level beyonders have extremely suppressive powers over low-level beyonders. I can tell. Back when I threw your copper whistle, even the Sequence 5 Admiral Hell failed to control his undead creatures." Klein nodded gently, indicating that he had taken note of it. Immediately after that, a zombie which had rotted in several areas rose up. Carrying an azure blue cufflink, it came before Klein. It was the Murloc cufflink he had lost. Although it's useless for the current me, I've finally gotten it back. As Klein was lost in poignancy, he reached out to retrieve the item that belonged to him. Then he saw Mr. Azek walk back and reach out to grab his shoulder. He hurriedly extended his arms to grab onto the shoulders of his marionettes, Enzo and Ludwell. All the colors saturated, brightened, and overlapped. Having entered the spirit world, Klein instinctively asked, "Mr. Azek, where do we go next?" "Berserk Sea," Azek calmly replied. He paused for a moment and then added, "Give me the copper whistle." "All right." Klein made Enzo take out the iron cigar case and retrieve the ancient cigar case. Azek reached out and took it before saying in a deep voice, "My intuition tells me that this ring left by death, together with this copper whistle and myself, should allow us to find the spot in the Berserk Sea where death perished back then." Klein subconsciously said, "My dream tells me that it's very dangerous. Perhaps we should first find the Numinous Episcopate members who are implementing the artificial death project. We can make decisions after receiving more detailed information from them." Azek fell silent for a few seconds. "A voice there is calling out to me." Klein turned his head to look at Mr. Azek. He saw that this man with soft facial features and weathered eyes had his facial contours furrowed. He no longer had that slight curve to his lips. Colors flashed by quickly as Azek brought Klein through the pitch-black storm that enveloped the Berserk Sea. At this moment, the dark square ring and the exquisite ancient brass whistle shimmered slightly, illuminating Azek's face. This death consul who had lived through the fourth epoch closed his eyes as he silently listened to a shout that came from an unknown location. Then he suddenly clenched his right hand. All the scenery from the nearby spirit world was imploding, turning into a slowly spinning black vortex whose borders couldn't be seen. The vortex suddenly burgeoned, devouring Azek, Klein, and his two marionettes. Klein sensed a sudden and intense sense of dizziness as he nearly vomited on the spot. He recovered after an unknown period of time, realizing that he was inside a dark, cold mausoleum. Around him were open coffins, and inside them were rotting corpses with white feathers on their backs. Although I warned Mr. Azek, we still ended up here. Klein was taken aback for a second as he suddenly felt a deep sense of helplessness. He turned his head to look to the side, and saw Azek standing near him. He was staring intently at the flights of stairs that led deep into the mausoleum. There was a thick black gas emanating in the area as they slowly swirled like smog. The one hiding in there might very well be artificial death, Klein couldn't help but warn. Azek's facial contours were no longer as taut as he curved the corners of his mouth. My slumber from before has allowed me to recall many more things. I saw myself seated on a bone throne, and I saw beyonders and ordinary people lying dead in front of the throne. They hadn't done anything wrong, but they died sudden deaths all the same. One by one they got up, turning into ghastly undead creatures that pledged allegiance to me. And I was just coldly watching them without any emotional fluctuations. I allowed the disaster to spread through the village and into the city. This made me feel unlike myself. However, I also knew very well that this might be the real me. As Death Consul from the Fourth Epoch's Balam Empire? Klein's lips quivered slightly before he pursed them tightly. Azek rubbed his temples and continued in an unperturbed tone. I sense myself returning to that past. Chapter 9:15. Another me. Without waiting for Klein's reply, Azek, who was staring intently deep into the mausoleum, continued. I still remember my resurrection after my first death. I was lying in a pale white coffin, and I staggered to my feet. I was feeling horrified, having no idea what was happening. Nor did I know where I was. Before the clergyman collected my corpse for purification, I escaped, stumbling along the way like a wandering ghost. I crossed grasslands, villagers, and cities. I couldn't recall who I was or where I came from. No matter where I went back then, I would hear all kinds of sobbing. When I watched priests presiding over mass burials, I felt sorrow in every corner. Later, I happened to rescue a noble lady and entered her manor. She was a bright and lively girl, and I was like a feral beast from the jungle. I was sensitive, suspicious, self-abased, afraid, and I often showed a cold, indifferent, cruel side that didn't match the morality of a human. She was very curious about me. No matter how I avoided her or what terrible things I did, she would approach me, infecting me with her smile. She would use interesting matters to influence me, and without realizing it, I got used to her pranks and her existence. We secretly got together. She was very worried that her father wouldn't agree to her marriage to a former tramp and present servant. Seeing her melancholic smile, I had the feeling of blood gushing through me for the first time. I rashly told her that I was leaving, but I would return with an aristocratic title and a bridal garland. I joined the army, becoming a knight. I raised a 3-meter lance and charged at enemies. Thanks to the chaos of the Fourth Epoch's wake in the northern continent, I became a baron and obtained a fief I could call my own. I abided by my promise, and with the king's conferment letter, family emblem, a knight's medal ribbon, and my self-made garland, I married my bride. Upon saying this, Azek's expression gradually turned gentle, as though he was reminiscing and recalling something. The corners of his mouth curled up without him realizing it. Klein's heart stirred from hearing this, as though he had met the familiar Mr. Azek again. What happened next? He carefully guided the conversation. Azek looked ahead and said, Later, we built a castle on our fief. We had children, a boy. He grew up very quickly, and I could tell that he would grow up to be tall and stout. He enjoyed combat, often running around while dragging a broadsword, claiming that he wanted to become a knight. I thought it was just child's talk that wouldn't last. However, even if he broke his leg or hurt his head, he didn't abandon his training. He thought that I wouldn't be able to see him if he hid in his room grimacing while tending to his wound. He underestimated his father. All the spirits in the fief were secretly under my service. Year after year passed. I recovered more and more of my memories. My wife often grumbled that the castle was too cold and dark, and that she wished to go somewhere with sunlight and warmth. I satisfied her request, but it was only much later that I realized that it wasn't because she disliked staying in the castle, but that she was afraid of the changes happening to me. She was afraid of the colder me who was becoming a stranger. She never told me these things, spending time with me like she always did. We spent a beautiful time by the seaside in the south, and we even thought of having a second child, but unfortunately we didn't succeed. It was only when I sensed that my next death was approaching did I return to the fief, to my castle. My son, that boy told me that he wished to head to Backlund to become an attendant to viscounts or earls, and begin his journey as a knight. I asked him why he had made such a choice when he was only around 10. He told me that I was his idol and role model. He wished to become a noble by being a knight like me without the help of his parents. Back then, I had already recovered most of my memories. Faced with that child, I always felt a little awkward, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable. But when I heard his answer, I still felt an indescribable joy, satisfaction, and pride. He was my son, completely different from the children I had back when I was in the Balam Empire. Klein knew that Mr. Azek was talking about his identity as Baron Lamud I, and the child who made him proud and satisfied had been poisoned to death in his middle age or advanced years. He was nailed in a coffin and even had his skull taken away by Ensanguil. Azek's gaze went adrift for a moment. I died once again and woke up in a groggy manner. I instinctively left my fief and followed my prior arrangements to wander elsewhere. Every incarnation, I had a different life in the beginning. At times, I met with the sweetest love. At other times I received the most adorable daughter. The love, helplessness, and satisfaction left me taken aback, puzzled, and stumped again and again as I gradually recovered my memories. There was once a time where I was a filial son. I gave my parents pride, a beautiful life, adorable grandsons and granddaughters. But when I awoke and found myself, I recalled that in my previous incarnation, I had coldly watched their real son die in the battlefield, and had seized his identity. On the one hand I felt pain and guilt, and on the other hand, I felt it was nothing, something trivial. My inner heart seemed to dissociate into two. Back then, I had a mask that allowed me to change into anyone, but I lost it after awakening. This might have been something I deliberately lost. Klein recalled Mr. Azek's mention of a daughter, who liked getting sweets from him. After some deliberation, he asked, "I believe that it isn't a dissociation, but that you are fighting against madness." After losing your past memories, you who restart your life are always kind and warm, with rich emotions. At your present state, you probably recognize it even clearer. This might very well be the true you, your essence. And as a death consul, you suffer the effects of the Beyonder characteristics' latent inclination towards losing control. You suffer the influence brought about by a high-level death pathway Beyonder. I heard that he had already gone mad after the War of the Four Emperors. Klein's words weren't without much evidence, because he only knew a few of Azek's incarnations. Baron Lamud, the father who made a swing for his daughter, the filial child, and the warm and friendly history teacher. His goal was to provide a guess, a possibility to help Mr. Azek resist the death consul personality that came with his memories. It allowed him to introspect his past incarnations, and use this to achieve a particular compromise with himself that wouldn't be too cold. And as he spoke, he suddenly had a new idea. Without waiting for Azek to finish digesting what he had said, he hurriedly asked, "Mr. Azek, do you know about an anchor?" To secure themselves, the deities and angels use anchors to prevent the Beyonder characteristics' inclination towards losing control, and stop madness from corrupting them. Yes. Azek retracted his gaze and nodded. Klein wasn't too sure, but he used a rather firm tone and said, "Perhaps your repeated memory loss to restart and live a new life is the anchor you use to resist madness and the loss of control. Do not abandon them. Do not forget them. That is you. After saying that, Klein added inwardly, Anchor. Azik repeated this word as his mind seemed lost. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly sighed. This might be an explanation. At least, it lessens the intensity of my mental dissociation and conflicts. However, since I've already come this far, I should still head inside the mausoleum to see what's hiding there. Why is it summoning me? And what is causing me to die and revive again and again, losing my memories during the process only to find them again? This has troubled me for more than 1,000 years. It has troubled my every incarnation. I believe I can receive an answer today. The look in his eyes turned clearer as his voice seemed gentle, but there was an indescribable firmness in it. Klein wanted to stop him, but moments after he opened his mouth, he closed it again. Azik pressed down on his half-top hat. Without turning his head, he said with a gentle smile, "Remember to close your eyes." With that said, he walked forward, following the flights of stairs as he headed for the deep depths of the mausoleum. The wafting black fog didn't produce any more panting sounds. It slowly scattered into its surroundings, accentuating the illusory object that was coiled at the bottom. It was a massive feathered serpent that seemed to occupy an entire island. It had huge, dark green nearly black scales. Amidst the gaps were feathers covered in yellow oily stains. On every feather, there were thin illusory black tubes extending outwards. The exaggerated feathered serpent was both illusory and real. Its actual form was hardly describable. It seemed to be a combination of things incomprehensible to humans. Its eye sockets were burning with pale white flames. Its face was that of a human's. The face had bronze skin, and it had soft facial features. Beneath its right ear was a tiny black mole. It was another Azik Eggers. Chapter 9:16 Irresistible approach. Upon seeing this coiling feathered serpent deep inside the black fog, and a face at the top of the towering figure, Azik was first taken aback. Following that, the corner of his forehead throbbed as though he had been struck in the temple, splitting his head in two. Amidst the excruciating pain, several incontiguous scenes flashed in his mind. It was a feathered serpent with a face identical to his, even to the smallest detail. Above a silent land, there were countless pale corpses. Floating in midair, there were clouds stacked from bones that came from different species. Black tentacles that drilled out from the ground, with eyes that resembled dead fish at the tip of each tentacle. A transparent spirit body was forcefully pulled out of his body. After these flashing scenes, a pair of white flaming eyes that were on the brink of extinguishing glanced over. A white feather stained with yellow oil fluttered down, splitting Azik's transparent spirit body into two. One of the parts suddenly flew up and plunged inside the cloud of bones. The remaining part fused with a golden accessory that had appeared out of thin air. Amidst the pale white flames, it materialized back into a body of flesh and blood. This scene was like a thunder god's hammer striking down at Azik's mind, again and again, making the pain hardly bearable. He raised his hand to his head as his knees gradually buckled as he knelt on the staircase. He had finally recalled everything that had happened, and he understood the reason why he was constantly dying and reviving, always losing his memories and having to recover them every single time. His soul wasn't complete. Similarly, Azik also understood why the feathered serpent suppressing the entire space in the depths of the black fog had an identical face as his. It was him. That was the other Azik Eggers. And all of this was a concealed attempt before death's fall. If stitching souls existed, there was naturally the splitting of souls. At that moment, the crazy and powerful death had seemingly foreseen his outcome. Unwilling to die so simply, he secretly split the soul of his son, Balam Empire's death console. He took half of it away and used another item as a replacement, stitching it together with Azik's soul. It was a mystery if it was a deliberate arrangement of death, or if it was an unintended consequence of the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project. The half-soul that had been taken away from artificial death had fused with the target of the artificial death project. The uniqueness of the death pathway. It made the latter gain certain innate abilities as it began influencing high-sequence beyonders of the corpse collector pathway who had failed their advancement. And for the other half, Although there was a replacement that prevented it from being incomplete, the incomplete soul resulted in repeated deaths and resurrection just like Sequence 4's Undying. And due to the golden accessory inside his body, and the calling from the other half-soul, Azek, who started a brand new life every incarnation, would gradually recover his past memories with the passage of time. In the past, artificial death had attempted to identify the reason, but due to the natural recovery of his memories, he was often already close to death once more. He wasn't able to perform any in-depth investigations. Furthermore, the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death project had been raised in the past few centuries. It was only in recent times that they received some level of success. That was why he never found the answer. Ha, ha, ha. At some point in time, Azek's hands had left his head. They were placed on the staircase as his throat produced a voice that didn't sound human. Drops of sweat dripped down his forehead and hit the stone steps in front of him. They spread out into a layer of pale yellow oil, growing out into dense white feathers. At that instant, he felt the other half of his soul calling out, as well as its desire. The two selves, which had been separated for more than 1,000 years, were eager to fuse as one, to be whole again. No, Azek muttered in pain, unwilling to raise his head or reach out his right hand. He had seen it clearly. The him, as a feathered serpent, didn't have any reason. It was filled with extreme coldness and madness. If he became one with it again, he would probably immediately be restored to his state as a death consul from before. He might even become a fake death who only had godhood with zero humanity. He would forget everything, forgetting everyone who he had once cherished. No. Azek's throat squeezed out the same word again. Irresistibly, he raised his neck bit by bit as pitch-black and gloomy scales appeared. At his forehead, something that took a life of its own protruded out. His forehead cracked as a bloody opening appeared. A golden sliver of light emitted out of nothingness, taking form inside the flesh and blood. This ancient accessory made of gold was in the shape of a tall, slender bird. Pale white flames emanated around it in the form of feathers. Inside its bronze eyes, there were shimmering layers of light that separately formed a mysterious and illusory door. The moment it appeared, Azek let out a painful growl. He raised his head completely as two wisps of pale white flames burst in his eyes that had experienced much. Deep inside the black fog, the illusory and real feathered serpent had straightened its body. It reached its head out as the two identical faces of different sizes looked at each other in silence. As four pale white flames leaped, bit by bit, Azek, whose hands were on the ground, struggled to stand up with a warped expression. Slowly, he walked to the feathered serpent known as Artificial Death. As he approached, the entire mausoleum began shaking. The surroundings turned transparent, reflecting a world with countless skeletons and shadows. Bloody arms, bluish-black vines with baby faces, and slimy tentacles with dead fish eyes or two rows of sharp teeth tore through the boundary between reality and the illusory, reaching into the mausoleum. However, they clung straight to the ground without daring to move. East Balam Colane City. Daily Simone, who was rushing to her next target's location, suddenly stopped in her steps and held her head. "What's wrong?" Red Glove's team captain, Soist, asked in puzzlement. Daily frowned slightly as she answered, seemingly in reverie. "I hear strange voices. I can sense the calling that stems from an unknown place. I even wish to kneel to the ground. Can the rest of you hear it?" Soist prudently asked the other teammates. Just as Leonard Mitchell shook his head, he heard the slightly aged voice in his mind. "Look towards the Berserk Sea." Leonard subconsciously turned his body and looked in the direction of the harbor towards the distant Berserk Sea. He saw a swath of pure, deep black darkness. There weren't any gales, massive waves, dark clouds, lightning, torrential rain, or sunlight. Although Klein had his eyes closed, his outstanding spiritual perception allowed him to sense his surroundings. When he heard the painful murmurs and shouts that sounded like Mr. Azek, he could sense seemingly corporeal silence and the aura of death. What's happening? Although the artificial death deep in the mausoleum didn't attack Mr. Azek, it has inflicted him with adverse effects? Klein's mind raced as he felt anxious and worried. His spiritual intuition told him that what was about to happen was not something he wished to see. However, he couldn't figure out what he could do. He didn't even dare open his eyes to look at Mr. Azek's present state or whatever he had encountered. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with mere courage. It was a difference in the natural order of life, an unbridgeable gap. Suddenly, Klein had a strong feeling of helplessness. However, he didn't give up as he tried hard to think of whatever items he had on him that could be of use. Creeping hunger? No, it's at a completely different level. It won't be of any use. Death knell? Even worse. Grozel's travels? I didn't bring it. Neither did I bring the Black Emperor card and Tyrant card. Fate Siphon Charm. Yes, the Fate Siphon Charm. Klein was delighted as he formulated a plan. It was to use the Fate Siphon Charm to temporarily swap his fate with Mr. Azek. He would suffer the influence created by artificial death in his place. At the very least, I still have a chance of reviving. As for Mr. Azek, the deaths he previously suffered wouldn't from the damage inflicted. Who knows if he can awaken again in such a situation? Klein didn't consider if the Fate Siphon Charm was effective on Azek and artificial death. He only wished to give it a try. He raised his right hand and reached into his pocket. Then there was a delay in his actions. His arm rose a little before landing back in its original location. He froze for a moment as though he had been petrified into being a stone sculpture. Klein's lips quivered a few times as his expression distorted indiscernibly. Following that, he swung his right arm and reached his palm into his pocket and pulled it out. Gripped tightly in his palm was a black crystal card-like charm. At the same time, Azek was approaching the towering illusory feathered serpent. His footsteps sped up as though he was returning to his throne. However, his eyes, which had pale white flames, were filled with pain. His expression was extremely warped. No, Azek muttered once again. Wherever his skin was exposed, white feathers stained with yellow oil grew out from the gaps of pitch-black scales. The intense shouting and desire made him lose control of himself. He was about to soar into the sky and leap towards the gigantic feathered serpent that shared his face. Pale white flames spread out from the bird-shaped accessory at his forehead, flowing towards the rest of his body. Klein's spiritual intuition was sending warnings as he hurriedly said a single word in ancient Hermes. Fate. Just as he was about to use the charm, his surroundings suddenly quietened. There was no longer any sound. A slender, fair female palm appeared out of nowhere and pressed down on the golden bird-shaped accessory on Azek's forehead. A figure then materialized between Azek and the towering illusory feathered serpent, stopping the two's approach. With the help of this external force, Azek finally held back that desire and the irresistible calling to fuse together. The pale white flames in his eyes reflected the floating figure in midair. It was a beautiful lady wearing an ancient robe. She wore a black hood. Her face was deadpan, and her black eyes were deep and dark, devoid of spirituality. Chapter 9 17 choices. The strange turn of events inside the mausoleum left Klein, who had his eyes closed and his spirituality converged, completely unaware of what was happening. He had no idea if it was something good or bad. Therefore, even though he had already chanted the activation incantation, he still didn't dare rashly use the Fate Siphon Charm. He was afraid it would make things worse or that it would have the opposite effect. Seconds passed as Klein felt the passage of time was especially slow. He felt as though an entire century had passed. Finally, he heard Mr. Azek speak with a somewhat hoarse and uncertain tone. "It's you?" Following that, an unperturbed voice that was clearly female sounded. "You have 3 choices. First, continue proceeding forward to seek completeness. Allow Salinger to revive within your body. The second is to have me help you extract that half-soul, allowing you to take it with you. You will think of a way to stitch it back together, but this will make you transform back to your original form. You will stop repeatedly dying and reviving, but it will not be the present you. Your past incarnations will truly recede into being dreams. Third, it's to give up everything and directly leave. You will forever be stuck at your current level. You will have no way of advancing further. You will still die again and again, waking up with no memories, and repeatedly search for your past experiences." Klein was taken aback by what he heard. He never expected that there was another person in the depths of the mausoleum. Furthermore, she appeared to have absolute authority. She provided the former death consul, Isaac Eggers, different choices that he could choose from. This is that the artificial death that's hiding deep in the black fog? No, he originally didn't seem to have any intelligence. It's been so long, and it's not like he has tried communicating. Extract the half-soul, and think of a way to stitch it together. What does that mean? Isaac's soul was not whole to begin with. Extract it from where? The lady speaking is actually able to do something Mr. Isaac is incapable of? Also, who is Salinger? Why would he be revived in Mr. Isaac's body? He is death that caused the Pale disaster, Mr. Isaac's father or grandfather. He foresaw his death. Hence he left a seed in Mr. Isaac's body for him to revive? The first choice is definitely something to eliminate without any thought. The second and third choice each have their own problems. The former makes him not his current self. He will become an unfamiliar him. The latter is to suffer an undying curse for all eternity, never to receive salvation. If he's confident with himself, truly treating all the past incarnations as an anchor, then the second choice can be considered. It allows for reconciliation and a compromise. But this involves the splitting of a half-soul into half. It's impossible to guess what developments will happen to the other half-soul, which didn't experience those incarnations in the future. The anchor might not be able to resolve the problem. Ideas flashed through Klein's mind. He was puzzled, curious, stumped, and confused. He was so near, yet so far from a solution. It was Isaac's life. It was a future he needed to face. No one else could make the decision for him. And whatever Klein needed to say had been said. He stood there helpless and worried, waiting for Mr. Isaac to speak again. Isaac looked at the beautiful hooded lady in front of him without saying a word. The pale white eyes in his eyes flickered. The illusory but real towering feathered serpent seemed to sense a negative development. It suddenly lashed out its tail, wildly sweeping it around as it lunged its head downward and opened its gaping mouth, revealing dark red flesh and fangs that were tainted with yellow oil stains. It stuck out its black serpent tongue and spat dark green slime in a bid to devour Isaac Eggers. However, all of its attempts failed to be effective. It seemed to live in another world. Amidst the unsettling silence, Isaac raised his right hand and rubbed his temples. Calmly he said with a laugh, "Perhaps I'm accustomed to my present life. I choose the third choice." Just as he said that, the hooded lady clenched her fist, gripping the golden bird-shaped accessory tightly. Then, she retracted her arm, pulling out the ancient item from the gap in Isaac's forehead. Isaac's expression distorted once again, as though he was experiencing unimaginable pain. Every drop of his blood, and in every piece of flesh, there were some parts of his soul seeping out, mixing together into a transparent soul. This soul appeared complete, but it was filled with discordant and disharmonious feelings. It was because it was half gold in color, the same all the way from the brows, eyes, to the torso, and its four limbs. It had an ancient simplistic beauty. As the golden bird-shaped accessory was extracted, Isaac's translucent soul began to disintegrate inch by inch, as though it was being skinned alive. His throat let out an unhuman gasping sound once again, causing Klein's head to spin and ache. It felt as though a needle had stabbed into his brain, and was stirred wildly. In seconds, Isaac's spirit body completely split into two. Half of it transformed into a golden stream that infused into the bird-shaped accessory, while the other half returned to his body, fusing with his flesh and blood. The two pale white flames in Isaac's eyes were extinguished as the white feathers and pitch-black scales on his body receded. His warped expression also eased as he no longer looked as savage. His expression turned slightly pale and translucent as his forehead throbbed. Clearly, he was suffering a pain that stemmed from deep within his soul body. "Thank you for your help." He bowed towards the beautiful hooded lady. He turned around and floated up the staircase, coming to Klein's side. "You can open your eyes now," Isaac said with an exhausted smile. Klein hurriedly opened his eyes and sized up Isaac. Realizing that there weren't any signs of madness or loss of control, he was completely relieved. He curiously cast his gaze deep into the mausoleum. The black fog was still emanating, completely blanketing everything underneath. "Who was that?" he couldn't help but ask. Azek laughed and reached out to grip his shoulder. Even if I were to tell you, you wouldn't be able to hear it unless she is willing to let you know. As he spoke, Klein subconsciously grabbed his two marionette's shoulders. The colors around them saturated and clearly stacked upon one another. The two men and two marionettes quickly passed through the spirit world corresponding to the Berserk Sea, returning to Klein's inn in Kolain City. Azek released his grip and pinched his forehead. With a gentle smile, he said, I'll need to sleep for an unknown length of time in order to recover. If you have any questions, you can seek out the spirit world's 7 lights. You should already be aware of the corresponding ritual. Mr. Azek, are you all right? Klein asked in concern. At the same time, he rebuked himself. How can he be fine having lost half his soul forever? Azek laughed and said, It's not a big deal. I'll just be maintaining my previous state, allowing me to foresee my death and arrange everything, severing ties with my original life. I'll then forget everything and reawaken in search of my past. Like before, at least you're there, someone who knows a lot about my past. If I were to forget once again, I should be able to recall a lot when I receive your letter. He paused and nodded indiscernibly as he chuckled. Sleep isn't a bad thing either. At least I'll have dreams. In my dreams, I never left, accompanying her while taking in the sun while guiding that stubborn son of mine to use the broadsword. I'll also make a swing for that little kid that loves to wheedle. Having said that, Azek threw out the copper whistle and said with a gentle smile, Remember to write to me. But before I awaken, I will not reply to you. Just as Klein reached out to receive the ancient and intricate copper whistle, Azek vanished from the room, his whereabouts an unknown. After blankly watching this scene for a while, Klein suddenly let out a sigh. To go anywhere else from Kolain City by land, one needed to follow the spiraling path that led upwards. After passing through the different streets, one would arrive at the peak of the city. Then, one had to descend the mountain and enter a plain. At this moment, the Red Gloves team that Soas led was standing on a square at the peak, looking down at the abnormal Berserk Sea. Daily Simone, who had been pressing her forehead all this time, suddenly lowered her hand as she said, feeling somewhat puzzled, Everything has been returned to normal. There's no more problems. Normal. Leonard returned with a question in puzzlement. From his point of view, it was very difficult for Daly to return to normal before the end of the Berserk Sea's abnormality. Perhaps it's intermittent? Soas hesitatingly raised a theory. Daly was just about to answer when everyone's spiritual perception was triggered. Once again, they looked towards the Berserk Sea. In the swath of pure blackness, one bright star after another lit up. Backlund. Beneath St. Samuel Cathedral, Archbishop Anthony Stevenson received an emergency telegram from the sea. The telegram's content was rather simple, but it was sufficiently shocking. Gehrman Sparrow has appeared, boarding the Black Tulip with another person. He has made Ludwell into a marionette and left with the person Ludwell addressed as Death Consul. Gehrman Sparrow. Death Consul. St. Anthony silently repeated these two names. He leaned back slightly and closed his eyes. Once again, the corresponding complete information of the sealed artifact, 0 to 17, appeared in his mind. Number, 17. Name, Angel of Concealment, Danger Grade, 0. Extremely dangerous. It's of the highest importance and of the highest confidentiality. It is not to be inquired, disseminated, described, or spied. Security clearance. Pope, team of researchers, and Archbishop of the Backlund Diocese sealed method. The seal is completed through the combination of 1 to 29 and 1 to 80. Description. This isn't an item. Warning. She cannot be used. Appendix 1. This sealed artifact first appeared in the Pale Era of the 4th Epoch. Exact year missing. Exact date missing. Exact location missing. Appendix 2. Based on the information, she has been awakened 5 times. Appendix 3. A limited premise is the reason behind its inability to be used. It has been confirmed that she can be used as the goddess's descent vessel. Chapter 9. 18 Guesses and Ideas. Kolain City. Inside the inn, Klein sat on a reclining chair, reaching out to receive the black tea with lemon from Winner Enzo. Beside him, Admiral Hel Ludwell stood straight, wearing a mask with a rapier by his waist. He appeared like the most loyal guard. Only at this point in time did Klein, who had completely calmed down, have the mental capacity to analyze what had happened in Death's mausoleum. Amongst all of that, what he paid most attention to was the existence that had helped Mr. Azik get out of his predicament at the critical moment, and provide him with 3 choices. First, a female voice. Second, this matter is definitely advantageous to her. Otherwise, no one would cross such a great distance to provide assistance. Of course, if she happened to pass by and had helped Mr. Azik out of goodwill, that's also completely understandable and acceptable. But the problem is that the mausoleum is a product formed from Death's godly powers when he perished, a product of the characteristic, corpses, and the natural environment. Without the corresponding key, even deities can't find it. With a door that cannot be opened, how is it possible for anyone to be passing by? Also, Mr. Azik's actions had been very sudden. He didn't first seek out the members of the numinous episcopate that are carrying out the artificial death project for information. He directly followed the calling and arrived at the Berserk Sea and entered Death's treasure trove. If it's not someone who can locate me or him, or them being someone who has a strong prescient ability, there's almost no existence that can arrive in such a timely manner. Finally, the Salinger that can revive via Mr. Azik's body is almost certainly the I'm mad, but I'm stronger Death from the 4th epoch. That female voice directly addressed him by his name without showing any signs of respect. As Klein seriously analyzed the information, he suddenly had a theory, but he couldn't help but avoid the possibility. Based on what he knew, the Evernight, Death, and Giant Beyonder pathways were a group of its own. They could be interchanged at high sequences. And other than using the honorific name of Lady of Crimson, or some special grade O sealed artifact to occupy a portion of the moon's authority, the goddess also had the title Mistress of Repose and Silence. That totally pointed to the underworld and Death's domain. And back at the Foggy Town, and with his use of the holy sword to make a vow with the goddess bearing witness, as well as the goddess clearly possessing the authority of misfortune, it made Klein believe that he had entered her special watch list, just like how he singled out certain believers using the sea god scepter. Making a bold assumption and seeking careful verification, then almost all the questions can be answered if she really was the goddess. As one of the 7 orthodox deities, as one of the winners of the Pale Era, she has the level and right to address Death by his name. And having been labeled by her, once anything abnormal happens, such as me entering a strange place like Death's treasure trove, she would definitely sense it and take the necessary action in response. Furthermore, as it definitely requires some time, she didn't manage to stop it at the beginning. To her, that artificial death, or the death pathway's uniqueness that had initially come to life, clearly enhances her authority in the aspects of repose and silence. It might even allow her to directly intrude into Death's domain, just like what the Mother Tree of Desire did to the Chained God. When Death perished, the 3 sequence 1 characteristics should have automatically separated. It's unknown who received them. If the goddess is searching for them, perhaps ruler of the ancient underworld, Lady of all the Undead will be added to her title. Although Mr. Azik has been pursued by the Church's high-sequence Beyonders, he has ultimately never suffered any real threats. From the looks of it, the goddess has been waiting all this time for today's development. Upon coming to this realization, Klein suddenly felt a little frightened. He was rather pious. At the very least, he superficially raised his right hand in a pious manner. Tapping 4 spots in a clockwise manner on his chest, he formed the sign of the crimson moon and muttered, "Praise the Lady." This made him recall the answer he received when he asked Snake of Fate, Will Septon, about obtaining the high-sequence Beyonder potion formulas of the Seer pathway. Can only be obtained from the Crazy Zeratul, or the Hornacis mountain range. If you are the blessed of the Evernight, treat it as though I didn't say it. After the incident at the Foggy Town, Klein had already discovered that heading to the Hornacis mountain range and finding Zeratul was the same choice. Even stealing the Antigonus family's notebook from St. Samuel Cathedral's basement was the same. And up to this date, he realized that the second line was not without meaning. He stroked his chin and muttered, "Perhaps, maybe, possibly." I'm really considered a blessed of the Evernight. Towards this, Klein wasn't too unreceptive to it. On the one hand, he had spent the first few months after coming to this world with the Church of Evernight's Tingen Nighthawks team. He had a group of great teammates and colleagues. He had a rather heartwarming life and acceptable ideals. To this day, he still recalled the past. Therefore, although he wasn't a worshipper of the Evernight goddess, he was very accepting of this deity. On the other hand, at least on what he had seen to date, the Evernight goddess had yet to show any ill intent. Instead, she had given him some blessings. Klein believed that since he had been specially marked, it was unlikely that he could be free from it anytime soon. All he could do was learn to accept it and make good use of it. Of course, I can't let down my guard. In addition, I already have too many enemies in the form of the Mother Tree of Desire, True Creator, Primordial Demoness, Primordial Moon, Blasphemer Amon, Angel of Fate Ouroboros, and others. Some of them might even be able to get a hold of my location at any time. Without finding someone powerful to cozy up to, my future will really be difficult. With so many things on his plate, Klein quickly adjusted his state of mind. To him, as long as the goddess had labeled him from the moment he made the vow using the holy sword, and not earlier, as well as not constantly monitoring him, he found it acceptable. At least from the special labels afforded to me by the Sea God Scepter, constant monitoring isn't possible. Mr. Azik will be sleeping for a very long period of time. The goddess can't just do a divine descent as she pleases. There must be some corresponding obstacles and difficulties. Otherwise, the 7 Orthodox deities would have made divine descents all across the world to resolve all kinds of problems. That's why I should keep a low profile and behave myself in the southern continent. I shouldn't try to pin my hopes on an external factor. Klein reminded himself before scrutinizing his new marionette, Admiral Hel Ludwell. To be frank, he was rather curious about the face hidden beneath the silver mask. But upon recalling how there was an anomaly when Ludwell took off his mask in their previous battle, he held back his thoughts. He planned to make the attempt again after he left the city, and did it in the woods or somewhere uninhabited. After some work, Klein gained a rough understanding of his new marionette's sequence and powers. Ludwell was Sequence 5 Gatekeeper of the Death Pathway, and he wasn't a normal human. The corresponding Sequence 9 was Corpse Collector. Back in Tingen, Klein had already learned of its specifics. He knew that they possessed certain traits of a corpse. Their entire being appeared rather cold and grim, and their body temperatures were relatively low. This allowed them to avoid being attacked by dead unintelligent spirits. At the same time, they also had their physical bodies enhanced. They gained resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of cadaveric auras. They were naturally equipped with spirit vision, and they understood the characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures. Sequence 8 was Gravedigger. Corpse collectors who advanced to this sequence become stronger. Their spirit vision was further enhanced as their agility increased. They were able to communicate with nearby spirits, allowing them to provide the Beyonder with help. Other than that, gravediggers could quickly find the weaknesses of unfamiliar undead creatures and spirit world creatures via observation. This was known as the Eye of Death. Sequence 7 Spirit Medium was a qualitative change. Beyonders of this sequence gained knowledge of various kinds of mysticism rituals related to spirits. They could directly communicate with the natural spirits and loitering dead souls in the real world. Hence, they had informants everywhere. At the same time, they could use different spirits to actualize different kinds of magic, creating various kinds of supernatural phenomena in a rather multifaceted way. Sequence 6 Spirit Guide and Sequence 5 Gatekeeper didn't experience a qualitative change from Spirit Medium other than an increase in the range for communication. Spirit Guides began involving themselves with the spirit world as they began hiring messengers and receiving the help of certain spirit world creatures. Gatekeeper could sense the entrance to the underworld, allowing them to control the dead spirits inside, doing so as though they watched over the gates that separated the dead from the living from Spirit Medium onwards. With the advancement of each sequence, the quantity and quality of natural spirits, undead creatures, spirit world creatures that the Beyonders could control and order increased exponentially. Spirit Guide gained the use of the additional language of the dead that circumvented the protection provided by one's physical body. Focused on the ability to communicate with a spirit body, the ability was enhanced to giving an order, to the point of slavery. Gatekeepers could even open the mysterious gate that separated life and death to a certain extent, opening the gates to the underworld. If it wasn't for the natural restraints that Azek's copper whistle had on the corpse collector pathway's control over spirits, I probably wouldn't have even had what it takes to fight Admiral Hell back then. And even now, if not for traveling to ensure my safety, I might not be able to finish Ludwell off, even if I used demigod-level powers. In the future, I have to take note when taking revenge on Nsangwil. He was once a gatekeeper after all. Klein nodded slightly, raised the cup, and drank a mouthful of black tea. As for the weapon Ludwell had, it was named Harris Rapier. It originated from a prince from the southern continent in ancient times. It didn't directly correspond to any sequence or pathway. It was more of a product that was similar to King of the North Ulyssen, who gathered similar characteristics without any proper rules. It only had one beyonder power, bringing absolute destruction to the items it stabbed. As a pirate admiral with the highest bounty, Ludwell didn't only have this mystical item. Unfortunately, his most precious death ring had been taken by Azek. As for the silver mask on him, Klein temporarily had no way of taking it off for research. Also, he really doesn't like money. He has zero need for money. Klein lowered his cup and retracted his gaze. Considering how it was still early, he planned on leaving Colaine City and heading elsewhere to wait for Danitz to finish his investigations. Chapter 919 Perfect Inference Backlund, Sherwood Borough. Furs, who was having an afternoon nap, jolted awake from her dreams. She saw an endless grayish-white fog and Mr. Moon, who had his head bowed in prayer, clearly hearing his voice. In the southeast outskirts of Backlund, in the middle of Delaire Forest, there is an abandoned ancient castle. In it are at least 2 ancient wraiths and other dead spirits. The possibility of other beyonders living there cannot be eliminated. The coordinates are. I finally have information on the main ingredient of scribe. Information worth £300. Furs was instantly delighted as she immediately thanked Mr. Fool and sought him to pass her message to the moon that she would make payment shortly. After completing this, she got out of bed and went to the first floor. She planned on pouring herself some wine to drink and consider when she would explore the abandoned castle, as well as the necessary preparations. For the meantime, Lemano's travels cannot be rented out. Zio needs to come along. That abandoned castle has several dead spirits and is rather dangerous. I have to consider the combination of spells. If there's anything lacking or not specialized, I'll hire Mr. World, Mr. Hanged Man, and the Sun to record the corresponding beyonder powers. Although Furs lacked actual combat experience, she had been mixing with beyonder circles for years. Later, she had joined the Tarot Club, and having heard and seen much, she naturally knew the need for preparations before any adventures. As for directly hiring Mr. World to do it, she had long struck it off her list of options. She believed that giving all the spoils and her savings to him wasn't enough to hire him. Of course, if her attempts at exploration proved that the abandoned castle was extremely dangerous, something that a beyonder at her sequence couldn't enter, she would have no choice but to shoulder an enormous debt. After all, there was only hope and a future from being alive. In theory, I shouldn't reach that stage. There are still 2 demigod-level beyonder powers left on Lemano's travels from Mr. World. At most, I'll use it first and think of means to make up for it in the future. The only problem is that the 2 demigod-level beyonder powers might not be suitable against wraiths and dead spirits. Furs sipped some black rand as her various thoughts took form. At this point, she heard a key latching into the keyhole as she instinctively looked towards the door. The door suddenly opened as Zio walked in, carrying 2 paper bags that emitted a rich fragrance. Desi pies? Furs asked immediately before frowning in puzzlement. Haven't you had lots of commissions recently? Why are you back so early? Zio threw a bag of Desi pies over, and said without hiding her smile, I happened to walk past it. I also hadn't had lunch, so I planned on taking a break. Without waiting for Furs to ask further, she said, I've accumulated enough points. I can soon exchange them for the interrogator potion formula. Although her monitoring of Royal Guard Captain, Viscount Stratford, hadn't had any significant progress, it was the kind that accumulated points on a daily basis. All she needed to do was submit a passable report every week to receive the corresponding bounty. Therefore, together with the other commissions and their varying levels of success, Zio had already earned enough to obtain the interrogator potion formula. Finally, Furs sincerely felt happy for her friend. Then, she shook the wine cup in her hand. Shall we celebrate with a drink? At the same time, she also thought of something pertaining to herself. This is great. After becoming a Sequence 7, Zio should have experienced a qualitative change. It will make exploring that ancient castle a sure thing. Zio looked at the transparent liquid in the cup, before shaking her head incessantly. Drinking is bad. With that said, she frowned. Besides, I abhor the smell. Before Furs could speak, she suddenly recalled something. She stood up and walked to the door. I saw the mailbox filled with things. Haven't you opened it today? I didn't have the time. Furs wore a look as though she was busy rushing out her drafts. Zio was a person of action. Ignoring her explanation, she had already headed out to clear the mailbox. About 10 seconds later, she walked back in with a stack of newspapers and a few envelopes. As she looked at the addressee, she said, It's all yours. 2 letters from the publisher. One's an invitation letter from a surgery forum. One letter is from Pritz Harbor. Pritz Harbor. Furs's mind stirred as she put down her cup and caught the letter Zio threw at her. She seemed to openly tear open all the letters in front of her friend. Discovering that one of the letters was indeed from her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham. Calderon City is in a rather special spot deep in the spirit world. I'm not sure of its origins other than it's very dangerous. A demigod had once stepped in without ever coming out. When selling the actual spirit world coordinates to that gathering's member, there's a need for you to warn him. Mr. World's target is such a dangerous spirit world city. Furs stared at the letter in her hand as her eyes widened. The Red Gloves team, which had arrived at the next East Balam city, had rendezvoused with the local Nighthawks, taking up an office of theirs. Everyone shall have half the day off. We will start tomorrow morning. Soas took out his pocket watch and opened it. They were about to strike a secret gathering location of the numinous episcopate to find more information of the artificial death project, and dig out another batch of enemies that hid in Backlund. As for the information obtained from Ulika, they had already sent it back to Backlund via telegram. They didn't need to worry about the subsequent work. After all, they weren't the only Red Gloves team. Backlund's local Nighthawks were aplenty and powerful. Leonard and Daly were just about to seek out their lodgings to rest when a Nighthawk with some East Balam blood walked in with a piece of paper. A new telegram from Backlund. Soas reached out to take it, and after opening it for a few seconds, he said with a grave expression, Gehrman Sparrow has appeared again. Using divination methods, it has been confirmed that it's him. Gehrman Sparrow. Leonard wasn't surprised by this outcome. He already knew from Dwayne Dantes that his former colleague, Klein Moretti, was still alive. He curiously asked, What did Gehrman Sparrow do again? Soas surveyed the area and sternly said, He boarded the Black Tulip and turned Admiral Hell Ludwell into his marionette. Admiral Hell? Ludwell. Marionette. The Red Gloves could hardly hide their astonishment as they exclaimed one after another. Even Leonard Mitchell was extremely surprised. One had to know that Admiral Hell Ludwell, who wore the ring left by death, had the highest bounty among the 7 pirate admirals. He was publicly recognized to be the strongest beneath the 4 kings. He was definitely not someone an ordinary Sequence 5 could compare to. As for Gehrman Sparrow, he had actually boarded his ship, turning Admiral Hell into his marionette despite being surrounded by the latter's, undead army and subordinates. Although they didn't know much about a faceless and a marionettist, just the term marionette was enough to let them know that Admiral Hell Ludwell's outcome was worse than death. He's already this strong? He infiltrated St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate to meet the requirements for a demigod ritual? Leonard gradually fell silent as he didn't ask more. At this moment, Soest offered more information. According to the crew that escaped from the Black Tulip, there wasn't a fight back then. Gehrman Sparrow and another man boarded the ship. The moment Admiral Hell Ludwell saw them, he gave up any resistance and prostrated himself onto the deck, calling the man Death Consul. Later, he allowed Gehrman Sparrow to turn him into his marionette. Death Consul. Leonard subconsciously turned to look at Daily Simone. He believed that this Sequence 5 Beyonder of the Corpse Collector pathway likely knew what Death Consul meant. Daily scoffed and shook her head. I only know that the former Balam Empire, a blood descendant of death that ruled the real world, was known as Death Consul. However, the Numinous Episcopate's royal faction's leader has never called himself Death Consul. Another Red Glove, Cindy, mentioned in puzzlement. This was rather open knowledge amongst the Nighthawks. Those that reached Sequence 7 and above, or those who joined the Red Gloves, had the right to be privy to this information. As for the Artificial Death faction, it was even more unlikely for any of them to call themselves Death Consul. Who knows? Perhaps the Numinous Episcopate has fractured again. Now there's an additional Death Consul faction. Daly first made a casual comment before she thought and said, Gehrman Sparrow has a mysterious origin. His motives for infiltrating Cheney's Gate is unknown. Perhaps it's really related to the Numinous Episcopate. The Numinous Episcopate had always been a main target that the Church of Evernight had been trying to take down. The conflict between the two ran deep. Her statement reminded Leonard Mitchell of something, because he knew that Gehrman Sparrow was Klein Moretti. Furthermore, he had joined a secret organization that worshipped the Fool and represented itself with tarot cards, and had a working relationship with the Numinous Episcopate. In the few factions of the Numinous Episcopate, there's no Death Consul. Admiral Hell Ludwell can almost be confirmed to be an arm of the Numinous Episcopate. Dealing with him is equivalent to dealing with the Numinous Episcopate. Dwayne Dantes once said that the members of that secret organization come from different places with different goals. Klein's goal is revenge. Could the goal of one of the members be to strike the Numinous Episcopate, to gradually absorb them to revive or recreate death in their own image? Since there's an undying monster like Dwayne Dantes who lived since the Fourth Epoch, it's normal for that secret organization to have an additional ancient Death Consul. Perhaps his corresponding tarot card is death. As his mind raced, Leonard began believing that he had obtained the truth. Then he made a connection with certain details. Dwayne Dantes is an undying creature who had lived since the Fourth Epoch. He knows the southern continent very well. He recently left Backlund and has gone missing. Leonard was alarmed. Taking the opportunity while his teammates were in discussion, he lifted his teacup and covered his mouth, softly muttering to himself. Old man, could Dwayne Dantes be the Death Consul? Palaz Zoros' slightly aged voice said with a smiling tone. No, Balam Empire's Death Consul is both a rank and a title. It's also the name of the Death Pathways Sequence 2. Sequence 2. That secret organization even has a Sequence 2 angel. Leonard's pupils constricted as he muttered once again. How are you so certain that Dwayne Dantes isn't the Death Consul? Because he's not an angel? Palaz immediately chuckled. No. The reason is very simple. You've seen the real Death Consul's portrait before. Back when you Nighthawks were investigating Welch's suicide. You might have even met him personally. He's a teacher at Koei University's Department of History, Isaac Eggers. Isaac Eggers. Leonard was taken aback before he came to a realization. He finally understood how Klein Moretti was able to resurrect from the dead, why he was fine suffering curses, or why he could join the secret organization symbolized by tarot cards, doing all of that while usually not showing anything special about himself. The reason was that behind Klein was a member of the secret organization with the corresponding tarot card, Death. Chapter 920 Calderon's Origins Biome The Slums. Hooded with a mask underneath it, the hanged man Alger once again met with Admiral of Stars Catlia. At a table, the two of them sat across each other, facing each other without saying a word. Finally, Catlia said, "Have you heard the news?" Alger didn't directly answer as he returned with a question. The one about Gehrman Sparrow? Katlia fell silent for a few seconds and nodded. He has turned Admiral Hell into his marionette. Be it Admiral of Blood from before or the present Admiral Hell, they were both pirates who had a higher bounty than her. No matter how confident she was of herself, she didn't believe that the two Sequence 5 elites were weaker than her. You learned of it earlier than I expected. Alger confirmed the authenticity of the news in a tactful manner. Being a member of the Church of Storms, which controlled a large region of the sea, he could directly obtain the latest news from the official channels. Katlia curled her lips and said, "If the future were at sea, I might have to take days or even weeks to receive it. But I've been in Byam recently." She didn't divulge her intel source. After a pause, Admiral of Stars asked frankly, "What else do you know about this matter?" Alger shook his head. "I was trying to figure out the exact situation when I saw your signal, so I rushed here to meet you." Katlia nodded slightly. Gehrman Sparrow and Admiral Hell didn't engage in a battle. Ludwell didn't resist, because Gehrman Sparrow had boarded the Black Tulip with a man who was addressed as Death Consul. Death Consul? Alger's pupils dilated as he felt an indescribable pressure. Such a term wasn't something any random demigod could undertake. Furthermore, that wasn't something the man flaunted himself, but an honorific term that Admiral Hell Ludwell had used. Furthermore, he gave up resistance and was willing to lose his life. With the hanged man not saying a word, Katlia added, "In the death pathway, Death Consul is the name of the sequence too. Of course, every emperor of the Balam Empire was also given this title. Indeed, an angel from the death domain." Alger automatically ignored the latter possibility. After all, based on the acting method, the position of emperor was definitely held by a sequence 2 angel before the Balam Empire fell. And for someone who could make Admiral Hell become Gehrman Sparrow's marionette without putting up any resistance, they were definitely not something a mere title could accomplish. At this moment, Alger suddenly thought of something that left a deep impression on him. After Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos successfully fled, he was found standing by the side of an artificial lake. His face had rapidly rotted with pieces of flesh falling off. Even his eyeballs had rolled out of their sockets. It was undoubtedly the damage dealt by a potent force from the death domain. And Alger later confirmed that it was done by Mr. Fool's Blessed. To rapidly cause the death of a pirate admiral without him putting up any resistance, especially one who carried such a powerful sealed artifact, the assailant's level was obvious. The Church of Storms Spellsinger of God Archbishop Snake had determined at the scene that it was done by a high-sequence beyonder from the death pathway, and that it was not the person he knew. Alger had no doubts about that. He believed that it was done by a sequence 4 or sequence 3 demigod, in other words, a saint. He also felt horrified that Mr. Fool's Blessed was a high-sequence beyonder. Now he secretly gulped his saliva with great difficulty, believing that he had underestimated Mr. Fool back then as well as that Blessed. That person wasn't a saint but a grounded angel, one that shared the same level as the 3 crowns of the various Orthodox churches. When it came to religion, the 3 crowns represented the various churches' pope, pontiff, or chief shepherd. A death consul as a Blessed. Although Mr. Fool is still recovering, the amount of strength at his disposal is quite sizable. Alger's thoughts churned as his eyes shimmered. He was momentarily at a loss for words. Katlia sensed his gloom as she asked, "You seem to have recalled something." Alger deliberated for 2 seconds before vaguely replying, "Based on what I know, Mr. Fool has a death angel amongst his blessed." "That matches," Katlia said as though she was muttering to herself. "Then why did the world promise me mythical creature blood that's not from that death angel? Is it due to having closer ties with the other one, making it easier to obtain?" Perhaps. Although Alger felt that Admiral of Stars' inference wasn't wrong, he habitually gave a non-committal answer. Katlia didn't continue on the topic as she said, "We will start the operation tonight from 7:30 to 8. If you can participate in it, head over there with me." She has finally figured out the situation with the artisan? Alger secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked in puzzlement, "Why that time?" This wasn't the most suitable period for any covert operation. Once any mistake was made, the official beyonders would quickly detect it and rush over. Katlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose and said with a complicated smile, "It's because it's dinner time for them. And they will be having mushrooms for dinner." What's the connection? The experienced Alger realized that he couldn't read the subcontext of Admiral of Stars's words. East Balam, in the lush and humid forest. Klein deliberately avoided the main path and came to an uninhabited area. He planned on getting Ludwell to take off his silver mask. This wasn't only to satisfy his curiosity, but for a genuine reason. The silver mask was too striking. If he didn't deal with it, there was no amount of disguising that could direct the attention of others away from it. The biggest problem for a marionettist is the marionette's identity. The more powerful the marionette, the more famous they were while alive. Bringing one along with me has the risk of being exposed. If it wasn't because I didn't have the time to finish off the pirates on the Black Tulip, I would have had the means to keep it under wraps. For example, I could continue letting Ludwell be the captain while I pretend to be his subordinate. To a faceless, that's very simple. Klein sighed as he passed through the forest. There were many mosquitoes around him, but none of them came for him. All of them were circling Admiral Hell Ludwell, trying to suck his blood in vain. Klein had given his new marionette the green essence ring which attracted mosquitoes. This was because its effects were completely overshadowed by Flower of Blood. Wearing the two rings was rather meaningless for Winter Enzo. In addition, Klein had confirmed that Ludwell's situation was special. He wasn't too afraid of being bitten by mosquitoes. After walking a distance, Klein casually tossed a coin and stopped. After a few minutes of contemplation, he decided to finish something else before removing the new marionette's mask. This was because through this process, he could confirm the severity of the latent danger beneath the mask. Taking out the corresponding items, Klein quickly set up a ritual and moved the radio transceiver from above the gray fog to the real world. He wanted to contact Rhodes. Before he left Colane City, he had paid Miss Magician £350 for the spirit world coordinates to Calderon City. He had also been warned about the extreme dangers associated with it. Therefore, he planned on obtaining more information from two channels in order to prepare for his hunting mission. The two channels involved asking the magic mirror and red light. With Mr. Azik being in prolonged slumber, Klein decided not to hesitate further. He planned on expanding his social circle, and not just stubbornly and inflexibly stick to the Evernight goddess. He needed to find powers to balance things out, and the relatively friendly seven lights of the spirit world were the best choice. With the appearance of the radio transceiver, the surrounding woods suddenly turned gloomy. It was as though the spirit world had overlapped with the real world. In about 10 seconds, tapping sounds sounded. Illusory white paper began being spat out. "Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. There's temporarily no danger here. What say you?" Seeing this coquettish manner of speech, Klein sighed silently and finally confirmed that he had connected to the magic mirror Rhodes. He had previously been afraid that the white piece of paper would have the words, "I want to have a child with you." Of course, he had divined the level of danger of contacting Rhodes above the gray fog, and he obtained an answer that it was fine. However, with the mother tree of desire having a precedent of interfering with divination, as well as his misinterpretation of infiltrating St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate, he wasn't too certain. Indeed. Klein nodded in a reserved manner before asking, "What do you know of Calderon City in the spirit world?" Amidst clicking sounds, a piece of illusory white paper exited the radio transceiver in a hesitant manner. "I can't see that city too clearly. I do not know its exact state, but I can confirm that a saint had perished in there before. There were also certain angels, travelers, and spirit world creatures who had once entered to explore it, and left it alive in a relatively smooth manner. However, none of them got much out of it. Also, I know the origins of that city." Without waiting for Klein to press, more illusory white paper spat out amidst clicking sounds. Its former name was the City of the Dead. It was a grounded divine kingdom of the ancient goddess, Phoenix ancestor Gregrace. Ever since that ancient goddess opened up the underworld, her divine kingdom was moved there. The city of the dead gradually became the holy grounds of her descendants and believers. Before Grace was heavily injured by the ancient sun god, and had the city uprooted and thrown deep into the spirit world. None of its citizens ever came out again. The name Calderon originates from the Abraham family's angel, the first person who stepped in. In the language of the dead, it means unknown soul. Chapter 9:21 Politeness. First, when it came to the understanding of ancient gods, Klein knew as much as many high-sequence beyonders. After all, he had the City of Silver who had continued on from the Second Epoch to this day behind him. The corresponding myths that were passed down the ages had left plenty of influence. Based on what he knew, Phoenix ancestor Grace was a so-called ancient goddess, because of the City of Silver's creator. The ancient sun god who eventually ended up being consumed by the kings of angels dealt heavy damage to her. Eventually, she perished towards the end of the Second Epoch. However, her influence had yet to dissipate to this day. Signs of her existence remained because she was the founder of the underworld. City of the dead. Unknown soul. Ancient goddess. It sounds very dangerous. Klein looked at the radio transceiver in front of him and fell silent. Tap. 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 Another piece of illusory white paper spat out. Apart from that, I'm unsure of the rest. Great Master, I have a suggestion. Would you like to hear it? That's a nice question. Klein reined in his thoughts and nodded gently. Speak. The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker as a new line of text quickly appeared on the illusory white paper. Regarding Calderon City, you can ask Red Light Moria. I still have to ask Red Light in the end. Klein nodded slightly and switched to asking. Is there any danger if I were to remove Admiral Hell Ludwell's mask? No. A decisive answer appeared before Klein's eyes. That's good, he thought and said. Let's end it here for today. Great Master, Wise Master, in another 1 or 2 minutes, a gaze will be cast here. Your loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, will await your next summoning. Goodbye. The radio transceiver began tapping without any hesitation. Another 1 or 2 minutes. Why didn't you say so earlier? Klein was alarmed as though he was seeing a countdown timer on a bomb. He hurriedly used the altar and material he had yet cleared to set up a sacrificial ritual. He then threw the radio transceiver above the gray fog. After doing all of this and confirming that there weren't any anomalies around him, Klein made Ludwell walk to the side, and not face him directly as he took off the silver mask. Gloomy pale white light spewed out. But it wasn't as exaggerated in his battle between Klein and Ludwell. It only enveloped a small region like an extinguishing candle. Meanwhile, as the radio transceiver had been sent above the gray fog, the gloomy, cold feeling that had disappeared in the nearby forest appeared again. Furthermore, it had an indescribable sense of horror that struck at the heart. This reminded Klein of a cemetery and the legendary underworld. After waiting a few seconds, seeing that there weren't any additional abnormal developments, he made his other marionette, Winner Enzo, to circle to Ludwell's front and carefully observe the face that had been masked for extended periods of time. The face lacked flesh. Its skin clung tightly to his bones without any colors. It was as translucent as crystal. Beneath the crystal, transparent and indescribable shadows quickly flowed out, at times fusing with the skull, and at other times they shrank in gaps, surfacing on his teeth. Compared to the first 1 or 2 months of his transmigration, Klein would have been shocked by Admiral Hell's appearance, but now, having already seen all kinds of odd rampagers and mutated bodies, he wasn't shocked by such looks. After another round of research, Klein completely figured out Ludwell's condition. All of this stemmed from the unique traits of him being a gatekeeper. At Sequence 5, after becoming gatekeeper, Beyonders could use their bodies as cages that belonged exclusively to the underworld, allowing them to contain a certain number of souls, deceased, and natural spirits. As such, they obtained all kinds of unique powers with powerful helpers. There was no need to bring a huge undead army around in an eye-catching manner. This was the origin of many folk tales. Another purpose of a gatekeeper was an ancient role: to guard the underworld in their bodies, preventing the souls contained within from escaping, and to use them. This similarly had the symbolism of a pair of double illusory doors. And after ancient death, Phoenix ancestor Greggrace created the underworld. It was bestowing a small amount of the death pathway's authority to all gatekeepers. This made Beyonders of this sequence receive an enhancement in strength. The reason why Ludwell kept wearing the mask was because he had contained a powerful underworld creature in him. On the one hand, this creature could be used by him, and on the other hand, it was eroding his body, turning him into a half-human, half-dead existence. At the same time, ultimately, this creature was innately connected to the underworld. It was attempting to open the door and return. This was a combination of a gatekeeper's own powers and authority, and with the augmentation from Death's Ring, it allowed Admiral Hell Ludwell to enlarge the door to the underworld, allowing him to steer the Black Tulip directly inside. Half-human and half-dead form. No wonder Ludwell dares to enter the underworld. A real living person probably can't survive a second inside. Yes, that underworld creature gives his body some traits of a dead soul, allowing him to extract the spirit bodies of others remotely. I had suffered from that back then. Klein thought in enlightenment as he made Ludwell wear the silver mask again. The mask's purpose was to placate the soul. It allowed the underworld creature in Ludwell's body to be in a relatively calm state most of the time. After resolving his puzzlement, Klein cast his gaze back onto the altar. He wanted to attempt to contact one of the spirit world's 7 lights. In this aspect, there were special secret deed rituals, and the corresponding spirit channeling ritual he could choose from. After some consideration, Klein chose the latter. This was because a secret deed ritual required him to open up his mind and spirit, allowing the targeted existence to make contact and thus obtain certain knowledge, strength, help, and a spiritual experience. This also meant that his body's thoughts and secrets were open to that existence. And through the spirit channeling ritual, there were 2 types, direct communication and praying for a soulfall. As the spirit world's 7 lights were extremely lofty existences, Klein couldn't guarantee a response based on the ritual's request. Therefore, although he wished to communicate remotely via spirit channeling, he had to make preparations for a soulfall to show his sincerity. Lighting 3 candles and dripping liquids like mint essential oil, Klein specially took out a paper figurine and placed it on the altar for the vessel for the soulfall. If there wasn't anything similar, the supplicating target would soulfall onto him, just like how Danitz had requested Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina's soulfall back then. There were also 2 scenarios. First, the possessed body would lose all their senses, and they would have the corresponding existence control a certain part of their body, so as to facilitate providing a question and answer. The simplest example was one using the mouth to speak while the other controlled a hand to write. Klein quickly completed the first part of the ritual before he took a step back, opened his mouth, and chanted in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name. I pray to communicate with the inextinguishable light of the spirit world, the embodiment of infinite knowledge, the red who wields authority and will. The biggest difference between this spirit channeling ritual and ordinary ones was that it couldn't be directed to deities, be it the Evernight goddess or the god of knowledge and wisdom. Their honorific names couldn't appear in the ritual, or else it was bound to fail. From a mysticism angle, this meant that the spirit world's 7 lights didn't serve any deity. As the words that facilitated the communication with natural spirits were said, Klein saw the 3 flames burgeon as light splattering sounds connected together, as though a door of light was opening. The area around the altar suddenly turned silent and dark as pairs of unknown eyes looked over from different areas. A cold, gloomy air blew past. Apart from the 3 candles, all the items on the altar floated in midair. Among them, the paper figurine staggered straight as its surface was tainted with a thick, clean red that didn't look bloody at all. Greetings. As Klein recalled the description of the spirit world's 7 lights from some mysticism books, he spoke by following the correct way of interacting that he had concluded. He acted like he was facing a teacher. The bright red paper figurine's head moved slightly as it let out an illusory but stern voice. Hello there. Quite polite. Indeed, spirit channeling became a soulfall. Thankfully, I made preparations. Various thoughts flashed in Klein's mind as he earnestly and politely asked, "Your Excellency Ire Moria, I have a question I would like to ask you." "You can just call me Ire Moria. Please go ahead and ask." The paper figurine floating in midair seemed to be competing with Klein about who was more polite. "I wish to get information on Calderon City." Klein didn't change his attitude. After all, in the Foodaholic Empire, there was a proverb: nobody will find fault with extra courtesy. The bright red, nearly transparent paper figurine pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Can I know your purpose?" Klein didn't conceal his purpose. He frankly said, "To hunt a spirit world plunderer." The paper figurine's head moved slightly. That's indeed something that can only be found in Calderon City with ease. Elsewhere, spirit world plunderers are like a drop of water in the ocean. They are very hard to distinguish, and even I will occasionally discover them. I'm unable to lock onto them for long periods of time. A number of them are active in the core region of Calderon City. A few are scattered in the periphery. As long as you don't attempt to go too deep inside, it's actually not too dangerous. Unfortunately, due to special reasons, us Seven Lights are prohibited from entering. Otherwise, we could still provide you with some actual help. That's formerly the divine kingdom of the ancient goddess, Gregrace? Klein's heart settled down as he asked as a form of confirming the answers. The bright red paper figurine said, "Yes, the ancient death wished to revive herself, using the city of the dead, but she failed completely. The authority was taken by Balaam's death. However, this also makes Calderon City more dangerous because the setup left by the ancient goddess underwent an anomaly after the failure. As for what it has turned into, I'm not too sure." "Is that so?" Klein nodded indiscernibly. He raised a few questions about other matters, and received a rather satisfactory answer. "Biam. Outside a house near the harbor." Alger and Katlia were patiently waiting for the people inside to finish their dinner. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."